There are some seriously strange and creepy videos of all kinds that circulate on the internet. These videos can sometimes relate to certain cases or disappearances, and sometimes the paranormal. The Boy, a film released in 2016, portrayed the fear that one would experience the best when they discover someone living in their walls. A similar event took place in a man's home in Japan. Kasuya is a quiet town in the southern part of Japan that has a population of around 46,700 people. Kasuya is said to be free from issues that bigger areas would face, including economic and social inequality, more serious crimes, and poverty. But it did harbor something strange in 2008. The man in question was 57 years old at the time of the incident, and he was living alone, or so he thought. He began to notice some strange things going on in his apartment. He would find that food in the fridge had gone missing, or things would be moved around the house. At first, the man had thought it was he that was moving these things and just forgetting about it. And at one point, he believed he may have actually been sleepwalking, even though he had never sleepwalked before. The theories grew to other disturbing presences of paranormal origin, but he found this to be the most unlikely of causes. He concluded that the missing items were due to thefts, even though this too had not happened previously. This would cause him to become more cautious and ensure that he would lock all of the windows and doors before leaving the apartment. Soon, this appeared to be a useless effort, and the food kept on disappearing from the fridge. He searched for clues and evidence, but didn't find anything. The man began to think that he was going crazy, and that he was living with some ghostly presence for several months. Eventually, it had grown overbearing, and he sought to figure out what was driving him crazy. And so, he bought some security cameras, which he would link with his mobile device. In this case, unless there really was an invisible presence, he would be able to finally figure out what was going on in his house and where his food was disappearing to. The man was able to view the footage on his phone while he was at work, and he didn't have to wait long at all. On his device, he would witness a truly creepy ordeal. He could see a random person opening his fridge in his house and taking food. The individual then went to the couch and watched some TV. The person was certainly a woman, but her face was not visible, and it was not identifiable at the time. Once she'd finished eating, she would go on to turn the TV off and clean up the area. Once the man believed that he'd finally caught the thief, he contacted the authorities. Agents arrived at the house but couldn't find any clues indicating a burglary. The man had already noted that the woman appeared rather professional. After an extensive search, the police eventually discovered the woman hiding in a closet. She had placed down a futon and had a few plastic bottles of water. It was said that there had been just enough room for her to be able to lay down. The woman would be identified as 58-year-old Tatsuko Horikawa, a homeless woman. She didn't steal any money or other items of value from the man or his house. It was indicated that homelessness was not a big issue in Kasuya at the time, and she just needed a place to sleep. It was found that she'd been sleeping in the house for a year, ever since the man forgot to close the door one day. Tatsuko would also use the man's shower and his toilet, which is why she looked so clean and tidy. She would even clean the toilet and shower after she used it to ensure that everything was still as it was when he returned. She was arrested on suspicion of trespassing after the camera footage revealed where the man's food had been disappearing to. In the absence of the homeowner, the woman would leave her space in the closet in search of food. In the footage, you can see as the homeowner sets up his trusty camera. 2 hours go by, and it's assumed that the man has gone off to bed. In the top right-hand corner, a figure is noticed cautiously climbing down from her cupboard area. She manages to get into a nearby shelf and climbs down from there with the use of a chair that was underneath it. She does everything as quietly as possible and moves in a careful manner. She moves the chair back into place and proceeds to the fridge where she indulges in some food. She got more food from a closet and took her place on the sofa to watch some television. The homeowner later came into the kitchen before exiting out of frame. The woman soon comes creeping back into the frame after having to hide for a short while. She opened the food cupboard again and placed something back on the shelf. She would then go from place to place and indulge in more food for the next several minutes. She makes use of the chair once again to climb onto the shelf and then puts it back into place. She can then be seen carefully climbing back to the top of the cupboard. She would do this on a regular basis, it seemed. The footage goes on to the following morning when the homeowners come into frame. completely unaware as to what had happened the previous night. The woman is often referred to as the woman who came out of the closet, or who lived in the closet in some media reports. It's strangely incredible how someone is able to live in someone's house without them even knowing it for over a year. While the woman left the man relatively unharmed, the entire ordeal is still rather creepy. Who knows what may have happened if the man was met with a different kind of uninvited guest? While this story seems to fit quite well into the realm of the paranormal, it was certainly a real event, which in the end proves even scarier than a wandering ghost. This is certainly the strangest ordeal that one can find themselves in, one that would make a homeowner sell their house and move away. Unknowingly having someone live in your house is a haunting idea that was brought to attention as well in the aforementioned movie, but has now even come to life in the quiet town in Japan. It would have been a lot less creepy if it was an invisible presence instead. It's not been concluded as to what may have happened to Tatsuko after she was arrested. She may still be incarcerated for trespassing. An ordeal such as this would certainly make you want to check your closet before you go to sleep, or even when you leave the house. Speaking of unwanted guests, back in 2017, the Hernandez family had their evening dinner interrupted by something truly unexpected. The family believed that it was something that was not of this world. Brianna Hernandez expressed that when she saw it, her hair had stood up and she'd never seen something such as this before in her life. Situated in the family's home are a few different cameras. One of these cameras pointed into the kitchen where they were having their meal. In the video, you can see the couple sitting alongside one another when Brianna's husband suddenly spots something curious. He quickly rushed over to the window, shortly followed by Brianna. She had not seen it yet, but her husband noticed that there was some floating figure moving past their house. The outside camera luckily captured exactly what the man had seen. Calmly and casually walking past the couple's vehicles was what appeared to be a floating torso. No legs or bottom half can be seen in the video or by the couple. Additionally, trails seem to flow behind the ghostly figure. The apparition makes its way off camera, leaving the couple absolutely frightened. According to Brianna and her husband, before they'd moved into the house, they had spoken with the person who had been familiar with the property. The man had informed them that his uncle had passed away in a nearby residence, and so they believed that the ghostly figure was actually the uncle of the man. Of course, some viewers are skeptical about the authenticity of the video, but it's certainly one that's rather creepy. According to local reporters, the two have since remained silent on any developments in the future of this particular case. The identity of the apparition remains unconfirmed to this day. In an interview, Brianna explained that her husband just happened to look over right as the apparition came floating past. She expressed that she didn't see it at first. Her husband, though, did, and asked, "Is that a person?" He then stated that it couldn't have been, and the two went over to the window. She stated that it looked like a person, but from another world, and believed that this was a ghost. This ghostly figure appears bright on the camera and is clearly visible, and one can see the movement of limbs as he goes. The Hernandez family is situated in Clovis, New Mexico. Reports describe the figure as one that's gliding across the street. To one individual, though, the apparition appears to be skipping in a childlike manner across the driveway. To them, it appears that the figure vanishes, but its shadow can still be seen on the next yard that it prances over to. Commenters stated that the white clothing makes the person appear as a ghostly figure on the security camera infrared, while others think that this was just a hoax, such as a child dressed in a gown gliding past the camera. This strange encounter has certainly startled the couple. To this day, the figure remains a mystery. Was this a ghostly person making their way across the street, or is it just a glitch in the camera? This is the question that's been left after the release of such an incredibly creepy video. It's uncertain as to what the Hernandez family did after this occurrence. Perhaps they left the area, which some people may be tempted to do if they spotted something as eerie as this. The video doesn't outwardly appear to have been altered in any way. If it was, what would the family have to gain from a ghostly figure? Brianna's husband seemed in genuine shock when he had first seen the figure, and so did Brianna once she saw what her husband was so frightened of. It also appears as though the family's dog is just as scared and confused as they were. Some believe that this ghost appears to be walking somewhere with intention, while others believe that it looks as though it's a child playfully skipping along. What it is, we can't be certain of, but it is truly a terrifying experience, one that happens far too often all over the world to be ignored. Perhaps it was a trick of the camera or a random ghostly figure roaming the streets. Whatever it was, it left the Hernandez family shocked, and the hairs on the back of their necks standing up. Body camera footage belonging to a responding officer revealed his presence to Matthew Moore, a 52-year-old man who had reported his wife, Emily Noble, missing. In the video, an officer waits at the door of Moore's home on the 25th of May in 2020. Moore and the officer begin speaking, and another individual joins them. The officer asked what was going on, and Moore explained that his wife is uncharacteristically missing. He tells the officer that Emily's wallet and her ID is still in the house. Her mobile phone was also still inside, along with her vehicle parked in the garage. Moore goes on to say that in the morning, when he woke up, his wife wasn't there. He used a Find My Phone app, which indicated that Emily was in the next room, but she wasn't there when Moore had gone to look. The officer asks some more questions to piece the story together. On this day, the two were supposed to go to a party together, but Emily was nowhere to be seen. The officer and Moore then enter the house. He shows the officer where the purse was left and hands over Emily's ID. He went on to ask Moore some more questions and wrote down more details of the missing woman. Emily Noble was not found until 4 months later, when someone had stumbled across her remains in a wooded area close to her Westerville, Ohio home. It appeared to be a case of homicide. The authorities would then go on to speak with Dr. Bill Smock, an expert on certain homicide cases. He determined that she'd been choked, and so Moore was indicted in the homicide. In the trial that would soon follow, forensics would go on to play an important role, with Dr. Smock being a star witness for the prosecution. The case had then gone to trial in August of 2022. Heather Garvin, a forensic anthropologist, had then challenged the claims that were made by the expert. Another 3 forensic anthropologists would also be brought in and reviewed the reports. They concluded that Smock had very little evidence to back up his claims, which had in turn raised concerns as to his role in the trial. The anthropologists, though, were not involved in this trial, but had reviewed forensic reports that had been obtained by NBC's Dateline. The director of forensic anthropology at the Western Carolina University stated that Smock makes some authoritative statements that they believe he cannot support. A professor of anthropology at the University of Nevada explained that misinterpretation of such data can lead to some serious repercussions, and it's important to not overstate findings for this reason. Smock dismissed these concerns and stated that he had studied asphyxiation for almost 4 decades. He supported his findings and maintained that this was the only possible cause of Emily's passing. Despite the claims made by Smock suggesting that Emily was a victim of homicide, the jury came back with a verdict for Moore. He was found not guilty. Moore's lawyer stated that Emily's remains had been mishandled and had produced flawed conclusions as seen by Smock's assertions. Emily's remains were discovered by 3 women who had been searching for her. They were discovered on the 16th of September in a forest area where she would often forage for plants. Additionally, she was discovered in a kneeling position, and evidence of asphyxiation led to many assumptions, including a staged scene. A local coroner had analyzed these remains and determined 2 important findings. One was that Emily had suffered perimortem trauma to the nasal area and throat. She also had bilateral fractures to her hyoid and thyroid cartilage. 11 days after a report was filed with the coroner, it was concluded that the passing of Emily was caused by multiple injuries to both her head and her neck. But the report didn't clarify if homicide was the cause. Smock later expressed that he was trained to perform autopsies and that he had participated in many, including ones where the cause had been asphyxiation. After reviewing Emily's lab reports and images, he went on to make several conclusions, including that of homicide. In a report dated the 27th of May, Smock explained that Emily had suffered a quadruple fracture, which would not be consistent with ligature asphyxiation. Additionally, Emily had fractures that had been caused by blunt force trauma. Matthew Moore had been indicted for 2 counts of homicide, as well as felonious assault, in June of 2021 for the passing of his wife. Moore had expressed that the couple were due to celebrate Emily's 52nd birthday, but upon waking on that very day, his wife was gone. When Moore was arrested following the discovery of Emily's remains, He insisted that the police were making a mistake and that he had not taken the life of Emily. Moore was also videotaped during an interview, which would later be played for the jury, where he makes some suggestions as to what may have happened to his wife. Moore had also written a book based on his wife, titled Emily. It was released in a digital form in March. He stated that even though the verdict was not guilty, some may still believe that he is guilty. He expressed that this was something that he would just have to get used to, and maintained his innocence. He went on to say that the ordeal was not fun. He liked Westerville and stated that it was nice to live there. He also cared about what others thought about him, but hoped that one day they would read his book and they would understand what was going on. He added that although people believe he had done something to his wife, there's nothing he can possibly say that will change their minds. He also hoped that Emily's family would read the book. It's believed that Emily had gone missing sometime during the evening on the 24th of May in 2020. The following morning, Moore contacted authorities. During Moore's trial, the prosecution stated that the injuries sustained by the victim were not consistent with what Moore had suggested in the interview video. But the defense brought in the victim's medical history, which accounted for her alleged fragility. The defense additionally pointed out that the detectives who attended to the scene had not secured it well enough. The detectives even left behind some of the remains during their initial investigation. During the trial, the defense would also bring in facts about Emily's mental health at the time, and they would touch on certain tragedies that she had faced. Sadly, Moore's son from a previous marriage had also passed away in 2019. But in the case of Emily, the exact reason for her passing is still up for debate, with some analysts saying one thing and others being against it. Prosecutors had also dismissed the notion made by the defense and stated that there had been no red flags before her passing. Moore would go on to say that during the arrest and the trial, he was not given the time to grieve the loss of his wife. Moore expressed that there was no closure, and additionally there was the combination of being accused of her passing. While having to deal with those aspects, Moore had an overwhelming sense of pressure. When he discovered that the verdict was not guilty, only then was he able to begin the grieving process, which is why he'd gotten so emotional. Smock, though, still stood by his conclusions. He accounted for Emily's weight of less than 100 pounds, which he said would not likely cause a throat fracture to that extent. Smock went on to say that no woman by that stature and size had suffered such fracture patterns. The anthropologists, however, state that Smock's claims are glossing over some important gaps in the literature. It's been explained that much of the literature does not report on body weight, and so it's hard to state with certainty that what has been stated does not support such findings. Another anthropologist explained that a lot of the research is inconclusive. According to Smock, he and some of his university students helped him to review some of the cases of asphyxiation for the case, and he was unaware as to how many of them had included details such as body weight. In an email, another anthropologist who was testifying in Moore's defense explained that there had been some conflicting pieces in this literature, which also included the detail of weight as well as the type of asphyxiation present in the findings. This anthropologist went on to bring more factors into the mix. She included the age of Emily, as well as a condition known as osteopenia, which causes one to be more prone to fractures. With all of these conflicting claims coming in, it's difficult to ascertain what actually happened to Emily Noble that day. For the time being, though, Matthew Moore has been found not guilty of the crime. Just a few days before Christmas, a heroic rescue was captured on camera. In Tatwa, New Jersey, state troopers were able to find a missing man in the woods in a hypothermic state, possibly minutes away from taking his last breath when he was found. The man was 58-year-old Thomas McHugh. Thomas had gone to Stokes Forest on a UTV when he found himself stuck on a tree stump. He'd been missing for 30 hours, and his daughter Melissa had reported this to the police on the 17th of December, 24 hours after he had left. A desperate search for the missing father ensued. Melissa stated that the authorities immediately began their search because it was extremely low temperatures, and finding Tom in time was crucial. It was stated that the troopers got an image of tire tracks, and so the search began for tracks matching any nearby trails. The vehicle was found wrecked, but no driver was in sight. The man is lucky that it had been snowing. This allowed search teams to see his boot prints in the snow, enabling them to find him. The tracks appeared to show that he had lost his right boot as well as his walking stick. Tom was soon found a short distance away. The crew discovered him lying face up and with labored breathing. His body temperature had been 71 degrees Fahrenheit. Team members had taken off their jackets and covered Tom with them. They used their ballistic vests as a mattress to keep him off of the cold ground. The troopers would take turns rubbing Tom as they tried to transfer body heat. One trooper, Robert Hoffman, explained that this is similar to a sternum rub. Rubbing the chest may generate heat, and it's the most vital part of the body that's used to generate most of the heat. It was alleged that Tom had left his vehicle when he became stuck in an attempt to get help, but instead he became lost. Melissa explained that her father had become disoriented during this walk and decided to sit down but didn't remember anything after that, and so it was determined that he must have lost consciousness. The team had walked for about 2.5 miles before they finally found the missing man. The snow had certainly made it easier to track him. 6 to 8 troopers then carried Tom half a mile further in the cold and dark forest to an emergency vehicle that was waiting nearby to take him to the hospital. The 6-foot, 200-pound man was taken through mud and snow by the troopers to safety. Tom has since made a full recovery. One of the troopers was a Marine veteran named James Tanis. He stated that they teach them how to deal with these specific scenarios. Quote, strip down, get on top of them, and give them sternum rubs. He added that body heat to body heat is a crucial part and that you have to do whatever you can to keep that individual warm. Tom's breathing had improved, and once he was stabilized, they were able to get him through the forest. Chaotic footage taken from one of the troopers' body cameras revealed the moment the man was found. According to reports, he was moments away from losing his life. In the video, you can see a trooper walking before the camera and flashlights, leading the way. As soon as the camera neared the scene, another trooper can be seen standing to the side, while another lays on top of the missing man, trying to keep him warm. One of the troopers had called for another trooper who was running up to the scene. He had excess body heat because of the running and would aid well in body heat transfer to save Tom's life. They had taken turns lying on top of the man to get him warmed up. Nick Calloway from CBS 2 had met with 7 of the 8 troopers involved in Tom's rescue. They explained that they'd relied on their training and didn't consider themselves as heroes, but Melissa disagreed. She stated that they'd found the man so quickly and that they did what they had to do, but they also had gone above and beyond to save her father's life. The troopers did put a whole lot of effort in tracking down the missing man and making sure he would survive. The chaotic video clip reveals it all. It's uncertain as to how Tom became lost exactly, as he knew the area, but it had been dark and cold to the point of hypothermia. It was not confirmed or spoken of as to how he came to lose his boot as well as his walking stick. But luckily he did though, otherwise the trail may have run cold, or it may have taken longer for the troopers to find him. Melissa is overjoyed that her father was found and returned safely, and has made a full recovery. The amazing rescue was all caught on camera. The missing individual is pictured here along with his dog. The state troopers had done an outstanding job at locating him and ensuring that he survived. Any longer in the freezing temperatures and who knows what may have happened. Thomas McHugh miraculously did not succumb to hypothermia and was rescued just in time. A startling discovery was made in January of 2017. It was around 11:30 in the evening when a police body camera managed to capture the rescue of a missing woman, 28-year-old Jane Preby. In the dashcam footage belonging to a police car, a white vehicle can be seen traveling ahead. The police lights are turned on and the vehicle pulls over. Upon approaching the vehicle, a cop's body camera captures something that they didn't expect. In the back seat of the car that they had just pulled over, Jane Preby is found bound in chains. She was helped out of the car and the chains were quickly removed. A camera in the squad car reveals Jane's kidnapper, and a separate squad car is his accomplice. It was later discovered that the person who had kidnapped Jane was her ex-boyfriend, Jack Morgan, who was 31 at the time, and his girlfriend, Sophie Brown, who was 19. Morgan had planned on chaining Jane up in a New Mexico cave and then brainwashing her into being his wife. She was held captive by the couple for a lengthy 12 hours. Jane had been at her Las Vegas apartment when she was dragged out of it and forced into the minivan. The kidnappers would then drive her 650 miles to New Mexico. Luckily, there had been witnesses. Eyewitnesses had contacted the authorities after seeing a woman being dragged, bound by chains, and forced into a van. Police were able to track down the kidnappers and Jane by using a cell phone signal belonging to one of the abductors. The authorities stated that they could hear someone calling out, "Help me," as they approached the minivan. As the story began to unfold, it was found that 1 week prior to the kidnapping, Morgan had convinced Jane to come have coffee with him. She would go on to explain that she and Morgan were dating while in college and for a bit of time afterward. It was alleged that Morgan had devised this plan with Brown for over a year. During this time, Morgan had made fake social media profiles that he would use to track and stalk Jane. On the day of her kidnapping, the two abductors followed Jane to her complex at 4201 South Decatur Boulevard. But they were uncertain as to which apartment belonged to her, so Brown would pose as a volunteer who was collecting church donations in order to identify which apartment belonged to Jane. It was stated that Brown had told the authorities that he knew Morgan's plan was wrong, but didn't want to disobey him. Morgan was allegedly trained in martial arts and had used some techniques on a kidnapped woman to render her unconscious. A couple of kidnappers were on their way to the cave that they had spoke about when the authorities located them and pulled them over. Jane was rescued near a city called Espanola in New Mexico and was found slumped over and bound. Jane did sustain some injuries but was expected to survive as they'd been non-life-threatening. Police who had interviewed Jane stated that, as expected, Jane was rather emotional and expressed extreme fear for her ex-boyfriend, who she believed would find her and end her life. Morgan is said to be from Arlington, Texas, and both he and his accomplice are facing charges of first-degree kidnapping, conspiracy to kidnap, and false imprisonment. The state police sergeant, Chris Valdez, expressed that the FBI will be taking over with both the investigation as well as prosecution, since the ordeal took place between 3 states. Agent Jesse Whitaker had interviewed Jane and found what the plans were that Morgan had for Jane. Jane had told him that Morgan was going to take her to a cave and chain her there and brainwash her into being his wife. When the officers had pinged Morgan's phone that evening, it showed up as being outside of Santa Fe. The minivan was then intercepted near the San Pedro Shell gas station. Inside, Jane was padlocked to the wheel well. A preliminary hearing was set for the 15th of February at 8:30 a.m. in Santa Fe Magistrate Court. When detectives went to Jane's apartment, they found a camera tripod with cords that led to a computer, but the camera was not there. Jane's wallet and purse were also found. On the way to the apartment, the police had found various items of clothing. Inside, they also uncovered a stun device and a sharpened blade. There were significant signs of struggle. Later, they were able to determine that the 911 caller had been Jane's neighbor, 33-year-old Zhao Meng Li. They had seen a 30 to 40-year-old man with blonde short hair, a mustache, and stubble who'd been dragging an athletic-looking woman with blonde hair from the apartment, which was down 3 flights of stairs. He explained that Jane had her wrists cuffed and a chain secured her legs. Jane also had a gag in her mouth, according to the eyewitness. During an interview, it was explained that Morgan had tried to choke Jane at least 6 times during the ordeal before finally rendering her unconscious. Abrasions were left on her arms, face, legs, and neck following the incident. Jane allegedly bit Morgan's finger in an attempt to escape. Her kidnapper would then go on to wrap a full roll of duct tape around her neck, face, and hair. Brown, who's said to be from Phoenix, had later removed this using rubbing alcohol instead of having Morgan cut Jane's hair. Jane would later go on to explain that she tried to fight so hard because this is how people's lives get taken from them. She was almost certain that her life would come to an end that evening. In the back of the squad car, Jane's kidnapper allegedly began to sing Amazing Grace after asking one of the officers if he had a favorite poem. He noted that the camera was filming him and stared directly at it. Brown, on the other hand, expressed feeling afraid. The 2 kidnappers pleaded not guilty but had been awaiting trial in Nevada. It was thanks to a quick 911 call by Jane's neighbor that resulted in her rescue. Although she'd been captive for 12 hours, the minivan was intercepted and she was unchained by authorities after law enforcement officers were able to track her down. The 2 individuals were federally charged with kidnapping, aiding, and abetting. This carries a maximum sentence of life in prison with no minimum term. According to records, the kidnappers have been taken from the Santa Fe County Jail and were placed into federal custody. Brown would undergo a detention hearing, which determined that no evidence would ensure the safety of the citizens and the community, and an order was made to hold Brown until trial. Brown's attorney didn't attempt to get bail for his client either. The criminal complaint had been sealed as ordered by Susan Cushman, the prosecutor. Even though there was a claim of secrecy in the affidavits, it had been publicly released when the investigators charged Morgan and Brown, or it had already been known to the public following incident reports and press releases. Spring break of 2014 was going to be Rennie Jose's last as a student. He was in his final semester at university and getting ready to graduate. A trip with friends to Panama City should have been a fun celebration before Rennie faced the world of adulthood. A few days into the trip, Rennie vanished and hasn't been seen since. Rennie was 21 years old in 2014. A mechanical engineering student at Rice University in Texas, he was months away from graduating with a 4.0 GPA. Not a whole lot of information has been released about Rennie's life, but his parents claimed he was looking forward to graduating and looking for a job in the industry. On March 1st, 23 students from the university drove out to Panama City, Florida. Among them was Rennie. He and a group of friends rented a beachfront house on Front Beach Road for the duration of their stay. For a few days, the group enjoyed the usual attractions of spring break without any problems. But on the evening of March 3rd, Rennie disappeared. He was last seen walking along Beachfront Road, headed east, sometime between 6:30 and 7 p.m. He left behind most of his belongings, including his wallet and laptop, but had his phone with him. The next morning, he still hadn't returned. Some went out looking for him, or otherwise ended up on the beach, where they found some items of Rennie's clothing. This was at about 11 a.m. What makes this so strange is that there was a beach cleanup that morning, which took place at 6 a.m., and the clothes hadn't been there at that point. The police were called, and Rennie's family were informed of his disappearance. Unfortunately, many of those who had been on the trip with Rennie decided to end their vacation early. By the time his family arrived in Florida, only 6 remained. 2 others refused to speak with the family, and one of these contacted a lawyer. The 4 remaining friends gave conflicting accounts of what happened when Rennie disappeared. Not much from these accounts has been made public, but at least one person claimed that Rennie had taken mind-altering substances and had spoken about wanting to harm himself. His parents find that hard to believe and don't think he would have willingly disappeared. It wasn't long before another confusing clue was found. Items of clothing and a phone were found in a trash bin behind the house. They belonged to Rennie. All the clothes he had been wearing when he disappeared had now been found. At first, the police didn't believe that he had gone into the water. In early March, it was still too cold to swim for most people. Spring breakers were on the beach, but they weren't going into the water. But if he was under the influence of something, this would have been less of an issue for Rennie. Search teams were sent out over the water looking for any sign of him, and nothing was found. Since then, there's been little update on the case. Rennie's parents have continued to push for answers. His family visit Panama City every year to hand out flyers and appeals for information on the case. Unfortunately, it seems like the people who would have that information didn't remain in Panama City. A Facebook page was also set up to appeal for information, but as the years have gone on, nobody has come forward. There are 2 main theories about what may have happened to Rennie. The first was that he had a bad experience using substances or with alcohol and ended up in the water. He may have just wanted to go for a swim. The cold would have been especially dangerous, and Rennie could have suffered a cold shock response. Even capable swimmers can struggle in cold water, and he also didn't appear to be wearing any clothes, which would have only made things worse. There are a few problems with this theory. The main issue is the clothes that were found on the beach. It's easy to imagine someone throwing away clothes, not realizing that there was any significance to them. But the clothes that were found on the beach are more interesting. If Rennie had simply discarded them and gone for a swim, they would have been found by the cleanup team at 6 a.m. The second theory is that Rennie's friends know more about his disappearance than they've told authorities. Many have pointed out that most of the group had left before they spoke to the police, and it seemed strange for them to leave when their friend was missing. It might be that they weren't directly involved in the disappearance, but knew that some other minor offenses had been committed, such as underage drinking, and they didn't want their names attached to this. It's also possible that Rennie had gotten into some kind of accident, and the group decided to cover it up, thinking they would get in trouble if the truth was uncovered. Unfortunately, spring break is known for accidents. Every year, students lose their lives during spring break activities, due to things like falling from balconies or getting into trouble in the water. Alcohol often leads to fights which can easily get out of hand. According to a local news site, there was an unusually high number of incidents in Panama City that year. If some incidents did happen, it wouldn't have been unusual, but all of those incidents were resolved. It's only Rennie's family that are left questioning what happened. There's been little progress in the investigation since Rennie first disappeared, and the case remains unsolved. Rennie's described as being 5'10" and weighing 220 pounds. He had brown hair and brown eyes, and anyone with information in this case is asked to contact the Bay County Sheriff's Department at 850-747-4700. Derek Saville was last seen shortly before Christmas in 1954. Despite the decades since his disappearance, the case continues to be investigated to this day. The disappearance and assumed crime took place in a quiet village in Wales. The village was home to less than 600 people, including Derek, who worked as a bus driver. Derek was 25 years old at the time. His girlfriend, Ivy Wood, described him as a quiet and nice boy. He kept out of trouble and appeared to be relatively popular. According to the police, this was especially the case with the ladies, who liked his good looks and his happy-go-lucky attitude. The police claimed he was a ladies' man, and later in the investigation, 5 former girlfriends came forward to provide information about him. His success with women may have made him a few enemies along the way. They were jealous of his looks and charm, and he had a few romantic rivals. But overall, Derek was well liked. He was especially popular at the local pub, where he was on the darts team. The last time anybody saw Derek was on December 7th, 1954. It was his day off from work, and he spent the day in nearby Dymock, visiting his widowed mother. He later traveled back to Cannon Peon and picked up Ivy from her home at 8:30 p.m. They went to the local pub, and Derek seemed to be in good spirits. Later that evening, he went home with her and chatted with Ivy and her mother. At 11:30 p.m., Derek kissed Ivy goodnight and said he would see her the next evening. He left, carrying with him a laundry bag of freshly cleaned clothing. It should have taken him less than half an hour to go home to the room that he rented at Bush Bay, but he never made it back. Derek's landlady had noticed that he hadn't returned home, but assumed he'd spent the night with his mother. When he didn't visit Ivy the next day, she guessed that he'd worked a different shift, so had been busy all that night. Eventually, Derek's friends and acquaintances realized he was missing. Derek's bike was found propped up against the parish hall. Derek had left it at the bus depot before going out with Ivy and must have picked it up to ride home. But he hadn't gotten very far, as the parish hall was only a few hundred yards from the bus depot. The bike had a punctured tire. Early on, there was speculation that Derek might have fallen off his bike due to the puncture and hit his head. He could have been wandering around confused, but Ivy dismissed the idea. If he was wandering around with any memory, they would have found him or the laundry he was carrying relatively quickly, but both remained missing. It wasn't long before foul play was the obvious explanation. Today, police believe that someone has taken Derek's life. They may not have intended to. It's possible they just wanted to hurt him, but things went too far and Derek lost his life. It's also possible that some criminal intended to take his life. Hundreds of people took part in searches in rural areas around the village. Sniffer dogs were part of the search, as well as military search and rescue personnel. Overflowed rivers and ditches were searched, but no trace of Derek was located. Derek had been attacked before. A few weeks before his disappearance, he told Ivy of a strange thing that had happened to him after he had spent time with her. He was making his way home on his bike when he heard rustling coming from a bush. He turned to investigate, only to find a man coming at him with his arms raised. Derek dropped the bike to defend himself, but the attacker jumped over a hedge and ran away. During the investigation, the police dug up an area under a tree near where the man had jumped out from, but nothing useful was found. Another incident happened on the day he disappeared. A man in a car threatened Derek and said that he would get him. Who this person was has never been identified. Early in the investigation, there was one obvious suspect. He was one of Ivy's ex-boyfriends and had apparently been hostile to Derek in the past. But the unnamed man said that he had no problems with Derek and insisted he had broken things off with Ivy. He told investigators that things had ended amicably with Ivy, and they'd both given back gifts that they'd bought one another before going their separate ways. He had moved on and already had a new girlfriend. Another theory was that Derek was never specifically the target. Not long after Derek disappeared, one of Ivy's friends claimed something had jumped out at her while she was riding her bike. She wasn't able to get a good look at it, only saying that it was big, but it terrified her, and she hurried away from the scene as quickly as possible. She wasn't the only person to experience something or someone jumping out at her while cycling. Other locals reported the same thing. There was an air of terror in the community. It could have been just paranoia that was making people imagine things that weren't really there, or it could have been an attacker who wanted to add more victims to a list that included Derek. The case went cold. Other than the bike, nothing of Derek was ever found. Decades later, in 2007, a new witness came forward with information. The witness had only been a child at the time, but he reported that he had seen his father and a number of other men digging in a field near Canyon Peon around the time that Derek had disappeared. He believed they were digging a grave. Investigators traveled to Australia to interview the man, and he gave them a good description of the area. The individual's father had passed away earlier in the year, so he couldn't be interviewed. The field was searched, but there was no sign of Derek's remains or any of his belongings. Many of the potential suspects in this case have passed away, while others are in their 70s or 80s, but that hasn't stopped authorities from trying to get to the bottom of this case and find out what happened to Derek and where he is now. For almost as long as there have been banks, there have been bank robberies. The locations are a prized target for criminals. Even though they often have more security than other potential targets, they continue to draw in people who don't let the law stop them from getting rich quickly. Most bank robberies are solved relatively quickly. That's especially the case in modern times, when a criminal comes in brandishing a weapon and demanding money. Their image is normally caught on CCTV, and they're captured before they can even start spending their ill-gotten money. Decades ago, when CCTV cameras were not as common, it was less easy, but police normally got their man. Sometimes it took a while for the evidence to come together, but the criminal would eventually be put behind bars. But that isn't always the case, and it wasn't the case for an audacious robbery that took place in 1977. October 7th, 1977, was the end of the first full week of October. Staff at the First National Bank in Chicago were getting ready to close for the weekend. It was going to be a long weekend too, as that Monday was Columbus Day and the bank would be closed. Before the staff could enjoy their weekend, their chief teller had to count the money that they had on site. The vault at this bank was located 2 floors below ground. In the vault was a steel cage, and inside this was a cart. The 4x7 foot dark green cart, labeled T12, contained several parcels of money. After checking and double checking, the chief teller confirmed there was $4 million on the cart. The cart was locked, then the cage surrounding it was locked, then the vault itself. The teller's staff went away for the weekend and spent time with their families and relaxed. There was still security staff in the building though, and they kept a log of who was going in and out of the vault area and watched the building entrance on CCTV, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. On Tuesday, there was no sign that anything was wrong when the bank opened for the day, nor was there anything wrong during the day as people came in and out of the building without any issues. But at the end of that day, the chief teller set about his usual job of balancing the books. It was only then that he noticed that something was wrong. Exactly $1 million appeared to be missing. The staff went back through the receipts and checked the records again. It was such a round number that they assumed there'd been some mistake somewhere. Either something hadn't been counted, or something had been counted twice before. After a day of going through the records, they found that both counts had been correct. There had been $4 million in cart T12 on Friday night, and now there was only $3 million. By the time the FBI was informed of the loss, a large amount of time had been wasted. The cash could have been stolen as early as Friday night, and whoever was responsible had 5 days to make their escape. The FBI believed it was an inside job, and there didn't appear to be any other option. The first problem was a random thief would have encountered the layers of security. If they didn't work for the bank, they would have had to sneak into the building, pass the security guards and cameras, and know how to get into the vault, which was closely monitored. It seemed much more likely that the thief was someone that the guards knew and wouldn't think twice about being in the vault area. The second issue was access. There were multiple locked doors that the thief would have had to go through. Investigators found no sign of any of these locks being forced open. There were only 4 people who had keys to all the locks, and all the keys were accounted for. These were the chief teller, his supervisor, and a few bank officers. But there were roughly 100 other people who would be given access to the vault by one of these people. The amount of money that was stolen would have weighed between 20 and 40 pounds. $800,000 was stolen in new $100 bills, and $200,000 in used $50 bills. This would have been a small enough amount to fit into a typical banker's briefcase. Assuming that any of the staff members were allowed to be alone in the vault, it would have been a simple enough task for them to hide the money in a briefcase. Another reason why the police believe it was an inside job was the amount that was stolen. The thief would have known that the number would have made people think it was some kind of accounting error, giving them more time before the crime was discovered. Interestingly, it was also just under the limit for the bank's insurance to get involved. The theft insurance policy only included losses over $1 million. Whether that had any importance to the thief's decision to steal $1 million remains a mystery. Staff at the bank were investigated and given lie detector tests. All but one of the employees passed the test. This one employee returned inconclusive results. He was fired from the bank for allegedly not cooperating with the police, though. At the time, the man's name wasn't released to the public, as there was no evidence he was behind the crime. Later, the FBI would name him as Henry J. Zack. Henry had worked as a teller at the bank. In a 1978 newspaper report, the FBI said that Henry had not changed his lifestyle at all after the theft. But by 1985, when his name was released, the FBI claimed he was living beyond his means. Henry had struggled to get a job after being fired from the bank. He always remained under investigation by the FBI. His sister was also investigated, which resulted in the breakdown of her marriage. In 1971, an investigation into illegal substances led to the arrest of a man named Fred Brooks. Brooks had wanted to buy substances to sell them on, and had attempted to pay with 23 $100 bills. These bills had the same serial numbers as the ones that were stolen during the 1977 robbery. He wouldn't say where he had gotten the notes from, and the agents involved said the notes smelled as if they had been burned. According to the FBI, fingerprints found on some of the notes matched with Henry's sister. She told the newspaper she didn't even know how they got her fingerprints. Other than the $2,300 found in 1981, none of the money has ever been recovered. There was never any more evidence to connect Henry or his sister to the case, and the statute of limitations ran out decades ago. Whoever committed the theft managed to get away with it, and their identity may never be uncovered. Sigrid Stevenson was a talented musician who hoped to spend her life sharing her love of music with others. Tragically, she would lose her life on the stage in a dark and twisted crime that remains unsolved. Sigrid was described as a free-spirited young woman who wasn't afraid to do things her own way. She was also reserved and happy to spend time alone. But more than anything, she loved music and playing the piano. By 1977, she already had a bachelor's degree and was working towards her master's in music performance. She was originally from Livermore, California, but had moved to New Jersey to study at Trenton State College. The college is today known as the College of New Jersey. At the time, it was one of the best places for an aspiring musician to study, and it was little wonder why Sigrid had decided to move here. Her first year of study went without issue. In the summer break, she chose to stay in the area. She rented a room from a university professor. According to some reports, she later moved in with a volunteer firefighter. but other reports claimed she was still staying with the university professor, or at least she was telling people that was where she was staying. She may have actually been staying at Kendall Hall, one of the university buildings that had 2 auditoriums. Sigrid did get out of the area for a little while. She spent some of the summer break hitchhiking across New England and Canada. She would later write in her diary that her fingers felt stiff and that she needed to practice the piano again. That was Sigrid's plan for September 4th, 1977. It was a few days before classes officially started, but Sigrid was known to remain on campus and could often be found in campus buildings late at night. She wasn't the only person on campus. The night before, she had attended a play by the local theater group. It was called JB, and it was being performed in one of the Kendall Hall auditoriums. Afterwards, she made conversation with some of the cast, one of whom had actually invited her to see the performance for free. She mentioned that she was locked out of her accommodation with the professor, so she planned to stay overnight at Kendall Hall. Her friends claimed this wasn't too unusual, and she would often sleep in one of the dressing rooms or beneath the stage. It wasn't just a lack of somewhere to stay that drew Sigrid to Kendall Hall. It was an opportunity to practice the piano outside of hours. She wrote in her diary that she would need to get up early to practice so that she could leave the building before 11 a.m. It was just before midnight on September 4th when one of the campus security guards noticed Sigrid's bike outside the building. He recognized the bike and guessed she would be inside. He found the building locked but knew it was possible for someone to access the building anyway. The locks on the doors were old, and pulling on one door hard enough would allow someone to access the building. The officer found Sigrid's body on the stage next to a piano. There was a trail of red stains from the piano to Sigrid's body, which was covered in a piano covering. She'd been struck many times with a blunt object, and it's believed that the person responsible either brought the object with them or used a 2x4 that normally propped up the piano. The wood was missing when Sigrid was discovered. Divers swept a nearby lake looking for the weapon, but they had no luck. The weapon has still never been recovered. The crime shocked the community. When students arrived for the start of the school year, they were issued leaflets with advice on how to stay safe. It wasn't known if the disturbing criminal would strike again. Thankfully, whoever it was didn't, but that also meant that the police only had one incident to gather clues from. What exactly police found at the scene of the crime varies between stories. One newspaper article from 1982 claims that there was a scarf wrapped around her face and her hands were tied behind her back. These details are usually omitted from later versions of the story. One consistent element is that there was no sign of any theft, and Sigrid's money and traveler checks were found with her belongings. Another consistent element is the piano covering that covered her body, though it's not clear if this was just laid over the top of her body or if she was wrapped up in it. Strangely, this covering didn't actually belong to the piano on stage, and in fact it belonged to one in another building entirely. That building, Bray Hall, was much more modern, and the locks were much better. There was expensive musical equipment in Bray Hall, and nobody was getting in there without keys to both the building itself, as well as the room where the piano covering was stored. There were a few people who had keys to both the building, the room, and Kendall Hall. Even individual members of the janitorial staff didn't have access to all three, though. A key to Kendall Hall wasn't necessary due to the insecure door, but it would have made it much easier to sneak inside without Sigrid noticing. Sigrid did write in her diary the night before the attack that she'd heard a banging coming from upstairs while she was trying to sleep in the basement dressing room. She assumed it was people taking down the set for the play that she had just watched, but it may have been someone breaking into the building to wait for the perfect time to attack. There had been a lot of speculation about who might have been behind the crime. It seems to have been a personal crime and not the work of a stranger. The method the attacker used was extremely personal. As well as this, they would have needed knowledge of Sigrid's routine and access to Bray Hall. The crime appeared to have been planned ahead of time, with the individual moving the piano cover to Kendall Hall before the attack. Campus police and security did have keys to all three areas. They also carried blunt weapons. Campus police and security were among the hundreds of people interviewed in this case. They also handed over their blunt weapons and handcuffs for testing. There was no evidence any of them were connected to the crime. The performers in the play Sigrid had watched were also briefly suspects. Someone could have stayed behind after the performance, though none of these people are believed to have had access to Bray Hall. They also didn't have a motive. One of the performers claimed to be a psychic. After he was cleared as a suspect, the police asked him to look at the crime. He was allowed to touch Sigrid's belongings. He said that Sigrid had been hit on the right and left side of the head, but more so on the right. He also said there had been something wrong with Sigrid's fingers, as his fingers felt strange when he touched her diary. He offered no information that could help solve the case, though. There's been little movement in the 45 years since Sigrid lost her life. It's possible that some DNA evidence might be discovered and analyzed. When a student asked for the case to be looked at by a cold case team in 2014, the prosecutor's office said that there was no new evidence or leads to follow up on. It seems this twisted case will remain cold for some time. The devastating attack that cost Amy Gellert her life and put her parents in the hospital is one that has left law enforcement puzzled for decades. Over the years, there have been rumors about who was responsible, but no evidence. The case remains unsolved. For most 21-year-olds in Florida in March of 1994, it was spring break, a time for partying and enjoying their youth. Amy was not one of them. She had a rebellious stage in her youth, but no longer engaged in these sort of activities. Growing up, she'd wanted to be a roadie for a rock and roll band. Her passion for music never left her, but her job at 21 years old was far from what she would have expected years earlier. She worked as a sound engineer for her local church. She lived in Cocoa Beach with her mother Bunny and stepfather Bob, who had been in her life since she was 5 years old. They were both psychiatrists and were relatively well off. The family lived in an upscale part of the city with a low crime rate. It was quiet and not much happened there. It suited the family. That made the events of March 20th even more shattering. It was a Sunday, and in the evening, Amy and her parents attended the nearby Cavalry Church on Merritt Island. The three people traveled in two separate cars. Amy had recently been gifted her mother's old convertible, and she wanted to drive herself there with the top down. There was nothing out of the ordinary about the service, and at the end, Bob and Bunny went home. Amy still had some work to do, making sure that all the sound equipment that had been used in the service was put away properly. She told them she would be quick and would be home soon. Bob and Bunny arrived home expecting a relaxing evening, but they walked into a nightmare. Someone had broken into their home while they were out and was now brandishing two weapons pointed at them. One was an ornate-looking blade weapon, and the other was a hand weapon. The intruder was male, wearing a black ski mask over his face, a black top and pants, and white shoes. He wore black gloves on his hands, and he stood 5 feet 8 inches tall, and through a gap in the ski mask, Bob and Bunny could see his eyes and see that he was white. The intruder ordered them to get on their hands and knees and crawl from the kitchen into the living room. There, he made them both lie on their stomachs, with Bunny lying over Bob, and then he waited. The criminal paced around the room and seemed nervous, but not angry or aggressive. Bob guessed he was waiting for a ride and offered him his car keys, but the criminal wasn't interested in that. He also wasn't interested in any of the expensive items that the couple owned, or any of the jewelry that Bunny was wearing. He did take about $50 and some cards from Bunny's wallet, but she was wearing thousands of dollars worth of jewelry, and he left those items alone. About half an hour later, the tension was broken by headlights coming through the front window. A car had pulled up outside the house. This seemed to trigger something in the criminal, and he began lashing out at the couple with a bladed weapon. Bob was struck on the back of the head once, and Bunny was struck multiple times. Bob later told an interviewer that he thought they would both lose their lives if he didn't go and get some help. Despite his injury, he managed to escape from the house and started calling for someone to help them. He didn't even notice that the car that had pulled up outside was Amy's, and she was getting out. Amy had finished up her duties at the church and was about to come inside when her stepfather rushed out. The criminal followed him out and noticed Amy. Rather than going after Bob, he turned his attention to Amy and started to strike her too. Amy tried to defend herself and put her bag in front of her, but it was no use. It all happened very quickly. The attacker struck Amy multiple times and then fled from the scene, and he left on foot. Amy struggled into the parking lot of a neighboring apartment building, calling for help. A woman tried to help her, but Amy passed away before an ambulance could arrive. Bob and Bunny were both taken to the hospital, where they were treated for their wounds. They were in the hospital for several weeks, but more devastating than their physical wounds was the news that Amy had not made it. The police immediately began working to try to catch the criminal. Bob and Bunny hadn't been able to give the police much to work with. Other than his height and the fact that he was of medium build and Caucasian, there wasn't much else visual to go on. Bunny did say that he sounded as if he had a Maryland or Pennsylvania accent, but that was all the details they could get on the intruder. They could give the police some information on the weapons, though, because he had carried two. One was a bladed weapon with an ornate hilt. The way he was holding it, the couple couldn't make out anything about the rest of the handle, but the hilt looked like a chain that was twisted together. The other weapon turned out to be a prop. The police were able to determine this after they found the magazine that was left at the scene of the crime. This should have been a useful clue. There weren't many of these props around. They hoped that the nearby theater would be able to help. They reported that none of their props were missing and couldn't explain where this weapon had come from. There was some DNA found in the magazine, but the police couldn't be sure that it came from the criminal or someone else who had owned the weapon, and it didn't match any DNA on record. Other than that, there were no fingerprints and no other pieces of DNA found at the house. It's not clear if this was a burglary gone wrong or someone that deliberately targeted Amy. The police believe that whoever the criminal was, he'd been waiting for a getaway driver, and that driver may have gotten cold feet, which explains why he never showed up. The police offered that they could work with this would-be driver if he came forward with information, but that hasn't happened. A few suspects were put forward over the years, and these included a man who had a record of burglary. He was arrested a few days after the crime, after a police chase while he was in a stolen car. The cards that had been stolen from Bunny's wallet were found in the area where the chase took place, but other than that coincidence, there was nothing connecting him to the crime. Another suspect was one of Amy's friends. He owed Amy money and was believed to have had a problem with substances. He claimed to have plans to hang out with Amy that evening, but decided to change them. He called the house phone and left a message saying it was too late to hang out and that they should meet up another time. The call happened roughly 30 minutes after Amy was attacked. A third potential suspect was a man who had once been romantically involved with Amy. He wasn't considered a suspect until he passed away in 2013 due to a hit and run. Someone commented that the incident was karma for what he did to Amy. Others with fewer connections to Amy have been put forward by those who knew them as potential suspects, but none have ever had any evidence directly tying them to the case. Almost 30 years on, Amy's family and investigators are still searching for answers. Anyone with information that could help solve the case is urged to contact the Brevard County Sheriff's Office, Major Crimes Unit at 321-633-8413. When he was just 3 years old, York Woida Jr. moved from Germany to an island in Hawaii with his family. York grew up in Hawaii. He graduated from Castle High School and briefly attended Hawaii Pacific University to study his native language of German. He mostly worked as a carpenter and in his spare time enjoyed fishing. York did not drink alcohol or visit bars, but he did engage in at least one substance-related vice, marijuana. At the time of his disappearance in 2003, York was involved in an indoor grow operation in Oahu, in the neighborhood of Manoa, Honolulu. York and his father, York Sr., had allegedly been in the business for years, since at least 1999, when York first became involved with the man who would ultimately be responsible for his disappearance, Gregory Awana. A former deputy sheriff, Gregory was involved in growing marijuana himself, and had been approached by York to help in a grow operation in a rented house in Manoa. According to court documents, Gregory knew the owner of the home, and he thought he could cut York and his father from the operation. In 1999, Gregory told York that he'd lost the rental contract for the home and couldn't use it for the drug operation. But this was not actually true. In fact, Gregory thought that York Jr. and Sr. were untrustworthy and had decided to use the home to start a growing operation with supplies from Maui. For approximately 4 years, Gregory used the home in Manoa to grow marijuana without York's knowledge. He occasionally sold the drugs to York, but told him he had obtained it directly from Maui. In August of 2003, York drove by the Manoa home and realized that Gregory had been continuing to use it as a grow site behind his back. He reportedly was angry and believed that Gregory owed him a portion of the profits, since he had loaned the money and equipment to Gregory to set up an operation at the home. But Gregory believed that he didn't owe anything to York, who he felt he'd cut out of this operation years prior. Gregory and York agreed to meet on August 28, 2003. York asked a few associates to watch his back, and the pair agreed to the meeting from a distance. Gregory, meanwhile, brought his wife Jody as backup. At around 5 p.m., Gregory got into York's car, and the pair drove together to the Manoa house. Gregory had a backpack with him, which contained a 9mm handgun. At around 5:15, Gregory and York entered the home together. York's associate called him at about 5:30 p.m. to check on him, and York answered his phone and confirmed he was fine. But he did say that Gregory had a gun. York and Gregory continued meeting for several hours that evening. York spoke on the phone with his associate twice more, at 6:45 and 7:30 p.m. Both times he seemed calm and said that he would meet up with the group later that evening. But after a third and final phone call, York stopped communicating. He didn't answer his phone, and he was never heard from again. At 9 p.m. that night, his car was found on a residential street after it had been set on fire. Police moved quickly in investigating York's missing person case. By August 31st, a team of officers were set up to conduct surveillance on the Manoa house. At 12:30 p.m., Gregory and his wife Jody were observed carrying several boxes and trash bags out of the house, which they then loaded into a pickup truck and dumped. The boxes and bags were found to contain marijuana plants, towels, and cinder blocks that appeared to have bodily fluids on them. Based on this evidence, police arrested Gregory that same afternoon. Gregory quickly confessed to police that he and York had gotten into an altercation. He said that he'd shot the other man in self-defense and had dumped his body on August 29th. But what makes this an unsolved missing person case is the curious fact that York was never located. According to a legal opinion published by the Hawaii Court of Appeals, Gregory confessed to weighing down York's body after dumping him in a bay, which may have contributed to him being missing. But despite the lack of physical proof, Gregory was found guilty of second-degree murder in December of 2004. A jury rejected his claims of self-defense. In certain legal circles, York's tragic case is well known as a no-body homicide, an unusual case where an attacker is prosecuted despite a lack of evidence that a person has been killed. One case study found fewer than 500 such examples across the US. Nearly 20 years after the fact, York has not been located. Although his fate is presumed, he still is technically a missing person. Born in 1932, June Allison Streeter lived a groundbreaking life. She was a talented singer and performer, and traveled the country's various clubs and cabarets in the mid-20th century. June married 5 times and had 2 children. She met her 5th husband, Lawrence Streeter, when he was performing at a carnival. After they were married, Lawrence and June began a husband and wife act. As a country music duo, they lived on the road, singing at venues across the United States. But after 4 years of this life, June was tired of traveling. She told her sisters she wanted to settle down, but Lawrence wasn't ready to give up performing. Troublingly, June also said that she was afraid of her husband. Although she tried to leave several times, she always seemed to wind back up in Lawrence's arms. June allegedly said Lawrence had threatened her life more than once. On October 8, 1973, June, Lawrence, her 2 children, and their dogs were traveling from Lawrence's family home in Florida to Penn Yan, New York. Lawrence was driving, and they were towing a small trailer behind them. Eventually, the Streeters pulled over at a rest stop on Highway 431. They'd made it about 225 miles north from Lawrence's parents' home, but they had over 900 to go to reach Penn Yan. Some sources report that the couple were allegedly arguing. In fact, a noise complaint was called in at the rest area, but Alabama state troopers drove by and saw the vehicle and trailer, but didn't hear any commotion. They kept going without stopping to talk to Lawrence or June. That night, June's 2 children slept in the back seat of the car, while June, Lawrence, and the dogs slept in the trailer. The next morning, Lawrence awoke the 2 children and told them that their mother had left in the middle of the night. The kids could hear the dogs barking in the trailer, but Lawrence wouldn't let them inside. He told them that since June was gone, they would have to return to their father's home in Bath, New York. Without allowing the children inside the trailer to get their belongings, Lawrence drove them to the nearby town of LaGrange, Georgia, and put them directly onto a 2-day bus to New York. One of the children didn't even have shoes on, and both were ill-dressed for the cooler northern weather. Lawrence had unhooked the trailer from the car to drive the children to the bus stop. At some point after dropping them off, he returned to Alabama, where he registered the trailer under a false address. Then he went home to Florida. He didn't report his wife missing. June's children never saw her again. After several months, June's family eventually reported her missing to the police department in Penn Yan, New York. Investigators worked with authorities in Alabama, Florida, and Georgia, but were unable to find any trace of June. They also spoke to Lawrence, who reiterated his story that June had left in the middle of the night. A search of the trailer turned up some of June's clothing and other belongings, as well as a .32 caliber pistol, but no physical evidence was found. In 1974, Lawrence submitted to a lie detector test, which he failed. He was arrested for failing to return June's belongings to her family, but the case was eventually settled out of court. No further charges against Lawrence were ever levied, and he passed away in 2021 without ever revealing additional evidence. He was the only known person of interest in this nearly 40-year-old case. June's children have submitted DNA to be kept on file in case her remains are found. Her family believes Lawrence took her life and she's buried somewhere along Highway 431. The missing person case is still active, and anyone with information is asked to call the Penn Yan Police Department at 315-536-4426. Kathleen Haley lived alone in Newport News, Virginia, with just her dog Molly for company. She was a very private individual whose family has said that she rarely shared details about herself with anyone. The 5'10", 37-year-old woman with striking dark hair and dark eyes worked as a dancer at a local club, but the exact location of the club was unknown, even to Kathleen's family. She preferred not to tell them the name. They knew that she worked late hours, sometimes not getting home until 3 a.m. Although Kathleen was solitary and private, she checked in regularly with her mother and her sister, who she usually spoke to on the phone once or twice a week. Kathleen was last heard from on September 1st, 2012. She talked on the phone with her sister Diane and made tentative plans to come over sometime, although she told Diane that she was busy that evening. After that, none of Kathleen's family members heard from her again. Concerned, Kathleen's mother reported her missing on September 7th, 2012. And when police went to her apartment, they found an extremely frightening scene that seemed to spell trouble for the missing woman. Kathleen's home on the 2800 block of West Avenue had been ransacked. Her computer was missing, as was her dog, Molly. Kathleen's entire bed was also gone, and a section of carpet in the bedroom had been cut away and was missing. Elsewhere in the home, police discovered a mattress with brown staining on it. They also found stained clothing in a laundry basket and bodily fluids splashed on the bedroom wall. In the bathroom, investigators found cleaning supplies and several pairs of rubber gloves. Finally, Kathleen's car was still parked out front, but all of its doors were unlocked. In addition, the driver's seat was pushed all the way back, which may have indicated someone taller than Kathleen had been driving. Police quickly came to suspect foul play. They also had a suspect, an unidentified man who had been seen in the area earlier that week. The man, who witnesses described as white with blonde hair, was seen coming and going from Kathleen's apartment on September 4th. Notably, he used a key, which surprised Kathleen's family when they heard about it. They didn't think the notoriously private woman would let anyone have such access to her home. The man was reportedly seen walking from Kathleen's apartment to the nearby dumpsters with rolled up fabric in his arms, which may have been bedding. Although a composite has been created and distributed, the man has never been identified. To this day, Kathleen's case remains unsolved, with the unknown man being the primary suspect in her shocking disappearance. Anyone with information about Kathleen or the person of interest should contact the Newport News Police Department at 757-247-2500. Informants may also anonymously call the local crime line at 1-888-562-5887. On Sunday, August 7, 1983, retired professor John E. Warren went out for a walk on the New Jersey campus of Ocean County College. John, aged 69, lived about a mile away in nearby Toms River and planned to cut through the woods separating his home from the campus. It was 9 a.m. and the day had not yet grown too hot. John was in a regular habit of walking a 4-mile stretch through the woods and across the college campus. But his wife of nearly 50 years, Estelle, often nagged her husband to take a car to the campus instead of shortcutting through the woods. On the morning of August 7th, John called down to Estelle from the top of the basement stairs while she was doing laundry. She called back up that he should take the car, but he declined. He headed out to walk the dirt path. At around 9:15 a.m., a security guard saw John on College Drive on the campus. The 5'10" gray-haired man cut a familiar figure in his white sports shirt and blue jogging shoes. In addition to just having retired from the college 2 months prior, John was a regular walker in the area and had been a runner in previous years. Just 2 years prior, in 1981, he'd been diagnosed with arthritis in his hip, which forced him to curtail his 20-year jogging habit, but he was still in excellent shape. Estelle described him as a very athletic person, and his refusal to cut back on taking the dirt path through the woods certainly seems to back up that fact. At about 9:50 on August 7th, John stopped to chat with a jogger, a local man named Mark Hazer. Mark told investigators that he spoke to an older man matching John's physical description, who asked him how far he ran and wished he could run like that. This sighting would be the last time John was ever seen. Before his untimely disappearance, John was a well-respected professor and researcher. He taught engineering at Ocean County College for some time. But in the 1960s and prior, he'd been a senior engineer and consultant for the US government, specializing in rocket science and development. According to an article published about John in 2015, his resume highlighted as some of his accomplishments a fueling system for use on helicopters, analog computers for flight control simulations, and engine controls and instruments for aircraft. A former student recalled that John was quick to tell us stories of his days with RCA and some military research projects that he worked on in the 40s. After he went missing, some of those who knew John theorized that his work on missile guidance systems may have been related to his disappearance, but investigators found no evidence to support this theory. In the 2015 article published about John's life, one of his former students wrote that he still passes by the college regularly, and he thinks about the professor of engineering who changed his life. The student, a man named Bob Schwindel, wrote that both he and John were audiophiles, and that together they developed a pair of speakers that still function to this day. At John's retirement dinner, Bob and other students pitched in and bought him a bottle of scotch, as well as a plaque which they made using a circuit board etching technique. Bob also recalled calling John about a week before he disappeared to tell him that he landed a post-college job using his degree in engineering. It's clear that John was an excellent educator who touched the lives of many. It also seems that he didn't have any enemies or anyone who would want him to disappear, despite his track record of government work. But police do believe that John disappeared under mysterious circumstances. In addition to being a generally athletic person who was unlikely to be tripped up by a walk that he regularly undertook, John was known to be punctual, and his wife Estelle stated that he would always call her if he thought he was going to be late. At about 10 a.m., she became concerned and retraced John's steps through the woods. On the dirt path, she saw 2 sets of footprints from his shoes, one that led toward the college and the other that set back towards their home. By 11 a.m., Estelle grew concerned enough to call the police. The handwritten report, which is timestamped 12/23, notes that John's mental condition was thought to be normal, and that his wife said John had been wearing a white t-shirt, blue shorts, and blue sneakers. By the time the report was filed, the college security guard's sighting of John at 9:15 had been reported. By 2:30 p.m., Toms River Police had organized a search party, including a sheriff's department bloodhound, which used some of John's belongings to follow a scent through the woods about a mile away. Security staff from the college, as well as volunteer firebrush trucks, were also deputized to check paths, roads, and buildings for John. According to the police report, 3 military helicopters were diverted from a nearby mission and canvassed the campus and surrounding areas for approximately 30 minutes with no result. In total, 35 volunteers, in addition to local police, assisted in a ground and air search for more than 6 hours, but the search was temporarily halted after night fell. Every day for the next 5 days, the search party returned to the local woods, but no trace of John could be found. Police put out a missing person bulletin, and in the coming months, the local township police detective cross-checked John's information against a number of bodies in the area, and none were a match. The last concrete lead in John's case was recorded on September 24, 1983. Estelle called the police to her residence to tell them that she had found a shoe in the woods, which she believed might be related to the case, but the shoe did not belong to John. Police took the item into evidence at the precinct, but didn't make any further notes about the finding. John's missing person case was covered in local newspapers sporadically in the years following his disappearance, including a short profile in 2007 and a longer feature in 2015. If still alive today, John would be 109 years old. His 110th birthday would be November 16, 2023. Reports have not indicated whether Estelle is still alive or if the couple has any children or relatives who are still searching for him. But at the very least, some of John's students are still out there thinking of him, and they continue to hope for closure in this tragic case, some 40 years later. John's case remains under investigation with the Toms River Police Department. Anyone with information may contact 732-349-0150. Bright and vibrant Melanie Flynn was a well-connected resident of Lexington, Kentucky in the tumultuous 1970s. Born in 1952, Melanie grew up in a nuclear family with 2 loving parents and 2 brothers. Melanie's father, Bobby Flynn, was born in Lexington and attended the local Lafayette High School. He attended the University of Dayton on a basketball scholarship before enlisting in the U.S. Army and Merchant Marines. As a young man, Bobby played professional baseball for the Brooklyn Dodgers before returning home to start a family with his wife, Ella Ritchie Crow Flynn, a fellow Lafayette High School graduate. Ella and Bobby had 3 children, Doug, Brad, and Melanie. They raised their family in Lexington and instilled in their children a love of good sportsmanship. As an adult, Doug played for the Cincinnati Reds, and Ella in particular was a devoted fan. Melanie, too, spent some time in Cincinnati in support of her brother. As for her love of sports, Melanie was a passionate horseback rider who dreamed of being a jockey. In 1968, the Flynn family rose to further local prominence when Bobby was elected as a Kentucky state senator. He served just 1 term before returning to his job as an insurance salesman, but he continued to dabble in local politics, including a 12-year stint on the Lexington City Council. In 1972, the same year Bobby's Senate term ended, tragedy struck the Flynn family when Melanie fell off of a running horse and suffered a serious head injury. She was hospitalized for months and developed neurological deficits, including the loss of her sense of smell and taste. This affliction would plague Melanie for the rest of her life. Sometime in the 1970s, Melanie also divorced her husband, whose name has generally not been published in online records. It's clear that despite a seemingly idyllic childhood, her young adulthood was troubled. Some reports allege that Melanie began abusing drugs and alcohol in the years following her accident. She also reportedly was under the care of a psychiatrist and may have been taking mental health medication. In 1977, 24-year-old Melanie was working as a secretary for the Kentucky High School Athletic Association in Lexington. She appeared to have considered the job just a stopping point in her greater life's trajectory. In addition to her aspiration to be a jockey, Melanie was also interested in singing and had been thinking about a career in the performing arts. She even had a stage name picked out, Melanie O'Hara. On a cold January afternoon, Melanie was sitting at her desk, maybe daydreaming about her future, when her phone rang. It was her father, Bobby. He asked her to bring some materials home from work for him to review. Melanie promised she would, but told him that she first had to go to a 5:30 p.m. doctor's appointment. In addition to psychiatric care, Melanie also took prescription antihistamines for allergies. It's possible that her doctor's appointment may have been related to this. At 5 p.m. on January 25, 1977, Melanie left work in her 1975 Ford Elite. She drove down Cooper Drive and took a right turn onto South Limestone Street. She didn't arrive at her doctor's appointment, and her family never heard from her again. Bobby reported his daughter missing 3 days later to police detective Bill Kanan. Initially, he was concerned that Melanie might have developed amnesia related to her 1972 head injury, but a witness reported that they had seen Melanie at a local restaurant called Nellie Kelly's, talking to a man with a pockmarked face and brown hair parted in the middle. Another witness had seen her not far from the intersection of Cooper Drive and South Limestone Street, talking to a person in a blue van. Melanie had only about $12 in cash with her when she went missing. She was supposed to get paid on January 28th, but she never picked up her check. Her belongings were left untouched in her bedroom at home. 11 days after she vanished, Melanie's red car was found abandoned in semi-suspicious circumstances. On February 8th, local police discovered it parked at an apartment complex on Hollow Creek Road. Melanie's red jacket was inside the car, and so was her suitcase, left over from a trip she'd taken the previous week. Her purse and car keys were missing. The building at which Melanie's car was found was a known drug hotspot in Lexington. It's unclear if Melanie's parents, Bobby and Ella, knew that she was involved in drug culture, but Lexington area police were aware of both the Hollow Creek Road building and Melanie. In fact, some months prior, they had pressed Melanie into service as an undercover informant. She had reportedly agreed in order to avoid her own arrest for possession of marijuana. As part of her work for the police, Melanie was required to bring a detective to members of the drug culture in Lexington, introducing the man as her boyfriend. That detective was none other than Bill Kanan, a friend of the Flynn family, and the very same investigator to whom Bobby had reported his daughter missing. Melanie reportedly claimed that she and Bill did not have a personal relationship outside of her undercover work, but both Bobby and Ella came to believe that Bill was involved with their daughter. In August of 1977, Melanie's purse was found floating in the Kentucky River, about 20 miles south. The Flynns came to suspect foul play. Meanwhile, police were following up on several unusual leads that seemed to indicate Melanie might be in Florida. These included several witnesses at the Texas Hotel in Daytona Beach, who claimed to have seen a woman matching a photo of Melanie between March and June of 1977. Some of the witnesses even reported speaking to the woman, who was noted to have mentioned getting medical treatment for an allergy. The woman was also said to have similar mannerisms to Melanie Flynn, but she was never located, and ultimately the Florida sightings faded into history as unconfirmed. As time went on, Bobby and Ella Flynn grew more and more suspicious of the Lexington Police Department. In 1985, an FBI bust of a rogue narcotics officer named Andrew Thornton infamously ended in the suspect parachuting out of a plane with a duffel bag full of more than 70 pounds of cocaine. Thornton did not survive the jump, and he was found with a massive collection of drugs, cash, and guns. His passing exposed a massive drug ring operating within the Lexington PD for decades, an operation called the Company. Andrew Thornton joined the Lexington Police Department in 1968, where he volunteered for the brand new narcotics squad. Along with another officer, Henry Vance, Andrew became the department's premier undercover squad member. Andrew and Henry were both well-connected Kentucky blue bloods from wealthy families, and they became fast friends. Andrew ran the undercover operations while Henry acted as a unit spokesman. Those who knew Andrew described him as a Starsky and Hutch type of cop. According to the Washington Post, he drove fast cars, popped in and raided people. After just a few years, the duo reportedly became drug dealers themselves, sourcing their stash from police evidence lockers. In 1977, Andrew left the force and became a lawyer. Henry left as well, but the duo continued their illegal activities, and their syndicate eventually grew to involve more than 300 people who trafficked in drugs and guns. In 1977, Andrew, Henry, and another Lexington blue blood from their social circle named Bradley Bryant formed a private security company called Executive Protection Limited. The security company was allegedly little more than a front for the trio's growing trafficking business. But by 1981, Bradley had been arrested, and legitimate law enforcement was narrowing in. The full extent of the trafficking ring, though, was not completely revealed until Thornton's death in 1985. The repercussions of the bust were massive. The entire thing was chronicled in a 1989 book called The Bluegrass Conspiracy, and it was this name which reports have used when they describe the scheme, which Melanie Flynn may have been an unwilling part of. By 1993, Bill Kanan, the detective who Melanie was working with, was charged on a federal drug offense. He was sentenced to 18 years in prison and eventually passed away in 2020. Although sources do not confirm that he was linked to the conspiracy, Melanie's parents believed that Bill was a part of the trafficking ring, known as the Company. Bobby and Ella Flynn believed that there was a police cover-up in their daughter's case, and that evidence had been hidden. They stated that Bill Kanan had abducted Melanie and taken her life as part of this cover-up, but these claims have never been validated. Melanie's tragic case was most recently in the news in 2019, when an unnamed source led authorities to a property along the Kentucky River, where Melanie's body had reportedly been dumped. The person instructed officers to search for an underground septic tank in the Murphy's Landing area. The source was described as someone who wanted to get this information off their chest, but no further information was published, implying that Melanie's remains were not located. Her missing person case remains open to this day. If found, Melanie would be 71 years old this year. Tragically, her parents passed away just months apart in 2022, but Melanie's siblings still think of her regularly, and her younger brother Brad told reporters that he's glad Melanie has not been forgotten. Melanie's case continues to be investigated by the Lexington Fayette Police Department. Anyone with information can call 859-258-3600 and reference agency case number 0131-77048. The department can also be reached at 859-258-3563. 4th of March 2018, a Carroll County man mysteriously disappeared from his home. Vincent David Lee was 53 years old when he was reported missing. The Carroll County Sheriff's Office stated that while the case may have run cold, they're not giving up the search for the missing man. 2 years after Vincent had disappeared, the authorities released CCTV footage that was taken from within the Carroll County Jail, only hours before he had gone missing. The video showed Vincent giving money to a friend who had been jailed that evening. The staff who were on duty that night reported that Vincent was polite and friendly. Detectives who reviewed the video have also said that he appeared happy and calm in the footage. This had been the last time that Vincent would be seen or heard from. Not long after, the authorities were informed of the disappearance. Vincent's house was searched. Officials state that they found his vehicle parked at his residence, and nothing seemed to be out of order or disturbed. For the past 5 years that authorities have been on the case, they've stated that they've investigated it from top to bottom, which has turned up very little information regarding what happened to the missing man. After further investigation, a neighbor's security camera revealed that 2 women had shown up to Vincent's house on Horsley Mill Road. They'd been seen leaving the house with his pickup truck left behind. The gate was closed, and the lights, as well as the television, were both on inside the house. Vincent is said to have been self-employed in the line of maintenance and had 2 adult sons named Samson and Gabriel. The missing individual is also described as a joy to be around. He has a lot of friends and was a cheerful man. Vincent's sister, Verena Hollingsworth, stated that there are no clues as to where he may have disappeared or how it even came about. She explained that he would never have missed their mother's birthday. She said that even if he were on a trip, he would have called her and wished her a happy birthday, but they'd not received a word from him since his disappearance. This is said to have been one of the more troubling features of the case, as stated by Captain Jeff Richards from the Carroll County Sheriff's Prison. He expressed that a lot of habits that Vincent had followed throughout his adult life had changed or were not done, and this was a major concern in the investigation. Foul play has not been ruled out, but authorities are stumped as to who might want to bring harm to Vincent. The rolling hills and winding roads seem to hold in them secrets that the family is desperate to understand. They want their beloved family member returned home safely. Verena pleads that people in the vicinity just think back on the 4th of March. Any small sighting would be helpful to the case. There are many individuals who'd be traveling on these roads, to the store or anywhere else. In 2020, an investigator named Ashley Hulsey from the Carroll County Sheriff's Office had explained that they'd followed up with various leads that were not only local. They've received leads nationwide that turned out to be futile in the case. Detectives and Vincent's family believe that foul play was involved in his disappearance, and that someone nearby has information that may be able to explain what happened on the day the man went missing and who was involved in the case. A spokesperson for the sheriff's office said that they would like the opportunity to provide closure for the family and are now turning to the public for information. The 5th anniversary of Vincent's disappearance has passed, and authorities are appealing to the public for any information leading to the whereabouts of Vincent. It's encouraged that should anyone have any tips, that they contact the Carroll County Sheriff's Office at reportacrime@carrollsheriff.com. Vincent is classified as endangered and missing. He's said to be 5 feet 10 inches tall and weighs around 190 pounds. He has black hair and green or hazel-colored eyes. At the time of his disappearance, Vincent was bald. He's also known by the nickname of Vince. A reward of $6,000 has also been offered by Vincent's family and friends for any information leading to the whereabouts of this cheerful man. The CCTV footage taken outside of the county jail shows Vincent getting out of his car. He can be seen wearing a white shirt and jeans. He places his car keys inside his pocket upon nearing the building. He's then seen entering the building and heading to the front desk. After some conversation, he receives a white envelope and heads toward the exit. He can be seen approaching the vehicle he came in. This vehicle was also found back at his house. With no new leads coming up, the case has come to a standstill, and the man remains a missing person for the time being. The Carroll County Sheriff's Office Facebook page also features the missing Vincent David League. One individual asked in the comments if this was the same person whose vehicle, wallet, and keys were left behind, to which another person responded that they must have been thinking of someone else, but that Vincent's debit card had been stolen after his disappearance. But it's not been confirmed if there's been any activity on his bank account since the disappearance. The details surrounding this case are critically limited, which has subsequently led to no new developments. Some of Vincent's family members have also been seen in a few interviews regarding the case. Usually, missing people are found within 48 hours after disappearing, while others may take up to 3 months to locate. For Vincent, though, no one has been able to find him as we near a critical 6th-year anniversary of his disappearance. Tireless efforts have been put in to help find the missing man. Social media efforts too were stressed, but to no avail. We can only hope that new information suddenly comes to light and that Vincent can finally be found. The more media coverage a missing person has, the higher the chances are that someone will come forward with any bit of evidence or clues. For the time being, Vincent's disappearance remains a cold case, while his heartbroken family waits for any leads, hoping and praying that he turns up safely. In February of 2019, a 41-year-old woman named Amanda McPhee went missing. She'd been last seen in Adelaide on a Monday afternoon. An investigation was carried out, and Australian authorities were able to dig up some CCTV footage. This revealed Amanda filling up her car at a gas station and withdrawing $40 from a service station. This occurred at 15 minutes past 6 in the evening at Murray Bridge on the 11th of February. Amanda's family informed police that she was also spotted on CCTV camera at Keith, close to the Victorian border, around 7:30 in the evening that very day. It was reported that she had last been seen in Adelaide at 4:30 in the afternoon, aside from being captured on the CCTV cameras. Since that day, Amanda has not used her bank account, even though her family has regularly been depositing money into it in case she was in need. She had additionally not logged into any of her social media accounts. It's said that Amanda's children had been the center of her world for the past 8 years, but now they're asking their grandmother, Kathy McPhee, where their mother is. The events that unfolded were strange and suspicious. Amanda had gone to get her 2 children from school and brought them back home. She then got her daughter ready for ball practice, but instead she had taken both of her children to her friend's house. She dropped them off, left, and has not been heard from since. Just like that, she left her children behind, her husband Jake, a mobile device, clothing, and all of her personal items. Kathy informed the authorities that her daughter would have never left her 2 children behind, so she knew something was definitely wrong. She further explained that the situation was rather difficult for them, particularly for the children who don't know where their mother is. As for Kathy and Jake, they have no idea what to tell them. The grandchildren reportedly keep asking Kathy if their lost mother is coming back and asking where she is. They've even questioned if the police have found her yet. It's theorized that someone may have assisted in her fleeing and that someone knows where she might be. Kathy believes that whoever that person is will be able to give the authorities the information that's needed. She also explained that Jake has been trying to hold a strong front for the children and builds a routine to keep them on a steady path while the investigation carries on. The whole ordeal has been rather difficult for him. Kathy was said to have driven from her Mildura home in Victoria the moment she heard that her beloved daughter had gone missing. She's been at their home ever since and is looking after her grandchildren and helping Jake. The 62-year-old grandmother explained that to stay at her own house would have been a difficult task, which is why she had driven out to her daughter's home in order to do something that could help. She makes sure that the children are fed and also takes them to school. Kathy additionally had friends from Murray Bridge to Canberra that are on the lookout for her missing daughter. Another CCTV image was captured of the car that Amanda had been traveling in. Authorities initially believed that she could have traveled to Canberra, where she lived previously. But Kathy suggested that she may have gone to Melbourne, since she was passing through Keith. Senior Sergeant Roger Kern explained that the woman had never disappeared in such an unusual manner before, and that she had made arrangements to attend a ball match at a local school, to which she never showed up. Authorities also suggest she may have left Adelaide for some sort of personal reasons, but that her friends and family are looking out for her. Sergeant Kern also detailed that they made contact with their counterparts in Canberra, Victoria, as well as New South Wales, to keep an eye out for the missing mother. Detectives were also checking traffic cameras to determine what route she may have possibly taken. Amanda is described as being 5 feet 5 inches tall and has a slim build. She has long, straight brunette hair and blue eyes. She'd been traveling in a blue Toyota RAV4 with the South Australian registration plate, S518ALR. According to statistics from the Australian Institute of Criminology, 38,000 people are reported missing on a yearly basis, with about 60% of them being found within 48 hours. Some statistics also show that there are around 1,600 people who are said to suffer from certain mental health conditions, who tend to go missing for a much longer time, over 3 months on a yearly basis. It's encouraged that should anyone have any information regarding the whereabouts of Amanda McPhee, that they contact the authorities on 131 444. The South Australian police are now appealing for public assistance in order to locate the missing mother. It's stated that friends and family are concerned about her welfare. An image of Amanda and her registration number has been released on the Facebook page 7 News Adelaide, with some information concerning the individual. Around 12:30 in the morning on the 6th of August in 2022, 16-year-old Kylie Rodney disappeared from the Prosser family campground in Truckee, California, after she had attended a wild bash with over 300 teenagers and young adults. The previous evening, Kylie had been captured on CCTV footage at a local store at around 8 minutes past 6, 2 hours before she got to the party. She can be seen wearing green pants and a black shirt. Additionally, A 2013 Honda CR-V belonging to Kylie is also missing. One of Kylie's friends had stated that some older men had crashed the party that they were at on the night that she disappeared. In a news conference on the 15th of August, the Nevada County Sheriffs revealed that they still did not have any solid leads on Kylie's whereabouts. They had stated that they were doing everything they could and were working closely with the family. Captain Sam Brown said that they would be moving into a limited but continuous search and rescue operation. They had since pulled up a lot of resources toward that goal. Captain Brown believes that they've spent over 9,000 man-hours in search of the missing woman, but to no avail. At the time, Brown also stated that everyone is on the lookout as they move into hunting season. Kylie arrived at the end of the school bash party at around 8 that evening. It was revealed that men in their late 20s had then entered the party as well. Sammy Smith, Kylie's friend, had shared footage with the authorities of the party that had taken place in a public woodland area that surrounded the campsite. The video in question had shown many teenagers and young adults gathered in the area surrounded by trees. There had been trash all around them and empty bottles. Sammy said she began to feel uncomfortable when the party started getting larger. The two girls had gone back to Kylie's car to charge her phone during the evening. Sammy reportedly left the area before Kylie had. There have additionally been no confirmed sightings of Kylie leaving the party. Lindsay Neiman, Kylie's mother, had later posted a video appealing for information that would bring her daughter home. She had last heard from her late that evening. Kylie had sent her a message saying that she would leave the party in 45 minutes and would be heading straight home. Lindsay told her daughter to be safe and told her that she loved her. Kylie's response had been, "I love you too," and that was the last time Lindsay would hear from her for the time being. It was found that Kylie's device had last pinged near Prosser Lake around 12:30 the following morning. The device, however, has since been turned off. Subsequently, swimmers and divers search the lake every day, but the waters are far too deep at a depth of 57 feet. The waters are also not very clear, and rescue teams are basically searching with their hands, according to Captain Brown. On the Saturday that Kylie failed to return home, her family reported her missing, and a missing person investigation was opened. The next day, the Placer County Sheriff's Office had established a tip line for anyone who had information on Kylie's disappearance. There had been numerous sheriff's offices that were responding to the case. Initially, there had been a total of 77 people assigned to the case, who had dedicated around 1,500 hours to the search for Kylie. Another few personnel were assigned to the case, which then totaled to 207 individuals. 1,100 tips had come in, none of which had led to the discovery of the missing youth. One strange tip suggested a burial site that was close to the Prosser family campground, as confirmed by Placer County Sheriff's Office Public Information Officer Angela Musalam. On the 13th of August, responders had searched for the burial site that was tipped off by an anonymous individual. The family was notified of the tip, and a search and rescue team attended the site, but the tip proved useless. FBI agents had also investigated the site, and nothing had been found aside from the remains of a dog, according to Officer Musalam. Kylie's friend, Sammy, was one of the last people to have seen and spoken to the missing girl. The last sighting was said to be at 40 minutes past 12 that morning. Sammy explained that at 36 minutes past 12, Kylie asked her if she would still need a ride home, and that was the last time they had spoken. The next development in the case was that of an eerie sweater. It was announced that Kylie was seen in a video wearing a white sweatshirt that said "Odd Future" all over it. The officials had previously released information about another sweatshirt that Kylie may have been wearing at the time of her disappearance. They believed that she may have worn the second sweatshirt later that evening, as the temperatures dropped, one that may have been borrowed from a friend. The message on this sweatshirt had read, "You don't want to be forgotten, you just want to disappear," which is a quote from a Lana Del Rey poem. In an effort to find out what happened to missing Kylie, the community hosted a teen-to-teen talk without any adults or law enforcement present. Sammy explained that she believed most of them were too afraid to speak up. It was said that the authorities were not investigating any of the teenagers who were at the party for whatever illegal activities they may have been getting up to, but were rather trying to partner up with them to locate a missing person. There have since been no new leads that have come up regarding the case. No solid tips have come in, despite the numerous amounts that have been received. The FBI had also brought in others to assist in the search. Police officers have been going from door to door as well, and CCTV footage of surrounding gas stations, stores, and other businesses has been checked. Additionally, doorbell camera footage from local residents has been seen, but to no avail. Kylie's vehicle still had not been located at this point. Dirt bikes, helicopters, and foot searches have been stressed, and authorities stated that the case has not been put on an Amber Alert as of yet because it didn't meet the criteria. Unfortunately, the case was concluded when Kylie's vehicle was discovered in the water. While this may have been ruled as an accident, the events surrounding it are certainly suspicious. As previously mentioned, thorough searches were carried out, including that of the waters and lakes nearby. Sonar boats were even used to locate her, but at this time, this turned up fruitless. Nothing had been found until 2 weeks later. Initially, the case was being treated as an abduction, which may have been what happened. As the authorities clamped down on the investigation, this may have spooked whoever was involved. Additionally, it had been a volunteer group that discovered these remains, and not law enforcement, despite their tireless efforts, which only furthered suspicion. Furthermore, there was no evidence that suggested foul play. In news reports, the body that was discovered in the vehicle is said to have likely been the missing person that they'd been searching for. Collectively, 19,951 hours were stressed in the search for missing Kylie, and 1,871 tips came in, which led nowhere. There are still some unanswered questions though. What was the burial site tip-off about, and why were the partygoers too scared to speak up? More than 52 years ago, in 1965, Mary Shotwell Little vanished from the Lenox Square parking area in Atlanta. This is said to be one of the most famous cases of missing persons in Atlanta's history. Along with the case of Mary was another famous case of homicide. It was that of the case of Diane Shields. They're listed as two of the most notorious unsolved cold cases. It was the evening of the 14th of October in 1965 that she had disappeared. Mary was a 25-year-old secretary at the Citizens and Southern Bank in Atlanta. She was a newlywed after getting married only 6 weeks prior to a man named Roy. At the time, he was out of town and due to come back that Friday on the 15th. Mary had finished work and made some grocery purchases to prepare for the Friday dinner party from the Colonial Market at the Lenox Square Shopping Center. The center is located in the Tony Buckhead region. This had been the only evening that she had gone out while Roy was away. According to one of the co-workers, Isla, Mary appeared to be happy and fulfilled with her married life. The co-worker and Mary had eaten and then did some window shopping together before saying goodnight at around 8 p.m. Mary neared her Mercury Comet in the yellow lot and had been carrying with her a leather handbag. Since that evening, the woman has not been seen or heard from since. Mary was described as a reliable individual, and her disappearance was noted the following morning when she didn't show up for work. Her boss had then called her apartment and the landlord answered the phone. He explained that the morning paper was still on the sidewalk and decided to enter the apartment only to find it empty. The boss then spoke with the coworker, Isla, who gave him the location of the car belonging to Mary. Mary's boss then phoned the shopping center and asked them to search for the car, but they hadn't found it. The boss, along with the police, then arrived at the center around noon to find the car exactly where the coworker said it would be. Inside the vehicle, there had been signs of foul play. There was red dust that coated the exterior, and groceries were still inside. Additionally, random pieces of Mary's clothing had been neatly folded on the seat as well. There had also been a rather small amount of vital fluid present, but it didn't indicate a fatal wounding. Strangely, there was a certain amount of time that the vehicle was not in the yellow 32 section of the lot, and the security guards had not seen the vehicle that morning upon doing their routine rounds. There was a stolen license plate registered to Charlotte placed on Mary's vehicle. Authorities further believed that the car may have been staged there due to the way in which the vital fluid had all been smeared. It was also noted by authorities that there were around 40 miles on the odometer that had not been accounted for. 1 month later, detectives had traced Mary's credit card to a gas station situated in Charlotte in North Carolina, and then again in Raleigh. The signatures that were on the receipts were said to match her own. The attendant at the gas station was also questioned, and recalled seeing a woman in distress accompanied by a man. The attendant at the gas station was also questioned and recalled seeing a woman in distress accompanied by a man. Some receipts were found later on that were believed to be tied to the case. After the information on the receipts had been released, Mary's husband, Roy, received a ransom demand of $20,000 over a phone call. The caller had demanded that he should go into the Pisgah National Forest, which is where he may come across a sign with instructions on what he should do next. An FBI agent went to the area that was indicated, and they found a blank paper stuck to the sign. The authorities and Roy were never contacted by the man again, and the ransom demand was thought to be a hoax, but this was never confirmed. It was later revealed that 2 weeks prior to her disappearance, Mary had become erratic and paranoid. It was as though she was afraid of something, or more disturbingly, someone. She'd been worried about being alone in her car or even at home. It was said that she had also received strange phone calls while at work. She was reportedly heard saying, "I'm a married woman now." Eerily, before the 14th of October, she'd received 5 red roses from an unknown individual whose identity still remains a mystery. Anyone and everyone who knew or may have known the missing woman was thoroughly questioned. Some believe that a random individual had carried out this crime, while others believe it's someone who she knew. Connections to other cases were also sought out, but to no avail. No body was ever found, and there were absolutely no leads that turned up regarding the case. This prevented any further development and to the case not being solved for so long. On the 29th of October in 1965, a newspaper article was released. An image of Mary was used along with the headline, stating a $1,000 reward was available for information leading to the missing person. Underneath the picture, there had been a short description of the details concerning Mary's disappearance. Some also believe that Mary had staged her own disappearance and began a new life somewhere else for entirely unknown reasons. Others think that Mary was abducted, and this theory is supported by another incident that occurred in the Lenox Square shopping center, where another woman had been accosted by an unidentified man. This took place before Mary had vanished into thin air. Her case remains open as of 2022 and has still not been solved. Mary Shotwell Little is said to have light brown hair and hazel green eyes. She wore glasses and is said to have a discoloration on her left arm, and also smoked Kent brand cigarettes. At the time of her disappearance, she'd been wearing an olive green cotton sheath dress, which had long sleeves and small white flowers printed on it. She also wore a white London Fog coat and flat shoes. A solitaire engagement ring was worn, along with a platinum wedding ring, as well as a scarab bracelet. She'd carried with her a set of keys and a brown leather John Romaine purse. She was born on the 14th of January, 1940. She's classified as endangered and missing to this day. She weighed around 120 pounds at the time and has a height of 5 feet and 6 inches. Should anyone have any information regarding her, you're urged to contact the Atlanta Police Department on 4048-533434. The case remains one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in Atlanta's history. After Mary Shotwell Little, her secretary position at the Citizens and Southern Bank was filled by Diane Shields, a 22-year-old. Diane's case is one that's woven into Atlanta's dark and twisted folklore. Upon filling Mary's position at the bank, she'd even sat at her old desk and conversed with her former coworkers. While Diane and Mary never met one another, their cases are connected by mere coincidence, along with various conspiracy theories. It was only 18 months since Mary vanished when Diane had her life taken away from her unexpectedly. It was the 19th of May in 1967, when the secretary had left the bank just after 5 in the afternoon. But by midnight, she still would not be home. This had sparked worry in both her sister and her new fiancé, who were due to be married. In a newspaper report, it was stated that Diane had gotten into her vehicle in the parking lot close to Washington Street and Hunter. She allegedly drove in a westerly direction to Hunter Street. Hours later, her body would be discovered in the trunk of her own vehicle in East Point. It was 3 in the morning when East Point police officers Grady Henderson and W.M. Wilson had called to dispatch after a report came in of a body found in the trunk of a car. Officer Jones, Captain L.M. Banks, Captain J.W. Stubbs, Captain H.A. Rickerson, Lieutenant L.D. Shipp, and Lieutenant Roberts all reported to the scene. In the driveway next to a building near the laundromat stood a blue 1963 Chevrolet Supersport Impala, Diane's car. It was facing toward Sylvan Road with the passenger door toward the building. The driver's side window was rolled down, and the passenger's sun visor was flat against the windshield, with the driver's side sun visor having been pushed down in a vertical position. The car's trunk was standing wide open in an eerie and uninviting manner. One investigator looked into the trunk to see an opened cardboard box on the left and a Betty Crocker cookbook on top, which had pictured a romantic dinner for two. Between the spare tire and the open box lied Diane's body, and on her left hand was a shiny engagement ring. She was fully dressed and wore an olive green dress and a white shirt, with olive trimming, but appeared to be barefoot. A medical examiner was able to determine that an act of asphyxiation had ended her life. Her fiancé identified her by the engagement ring on her finger. The two cases had since gone cold for over 50 years. Detectives have since retired or passed away before ever learning the truth. In 2019, a crime scene investigator still continued her investigation on the case. Cheryl McCollum stated that she believes she's one step closer to identifying the person who had taken the life of this woman. McCollum thinks that the suspect is hiding in plain sight in Metro Atlanta. A potentially crucial piece of evidence was uncovered, a creepy phone call. McCollum theorizes that the man behind the voice was the culprit behind the homicide. The caller allegedly said the following, quote, "I guess she was just stringing me along, huh?" McCollum has been investigating this case for the past 15 years. She stated that the caller's friendly phone calls to Diane may have turned into an obsession. The caller had expressed that he and Diane had dated at one point and revealed a few details about her. He then went on to state that he knew where to find some evidence that the case needed, which had been lost for decades. McCollum also stated that this caller had phoned CBS 46 the day that Mary had gone missing, and the day that Diane was discovered. It's also theorized that the roses Diane received had possibly come from the caller as well. Gail, Diane's childhood friend, stated that Diane seemed scared after receiving the phone calls as well as the roses. This only left more questions than answers. Who was the creepy caller? And what evidence was he referring to? How did he know both women? And why, if so, did he kidnap one and take the life of another? The police who had worked in the homicide case disagreed that the case of Diane and Mary were merely a coincidence. They believed that the two were somewhat connected. It's alleged that East Point's chief detective, Melvin Banks, thought that someone involved in the internal investigation at Citizens and Southern Bank was responsible for the homicide of Diane, but an arrest was never able to be made. As for Mary's case file, it's nowhere to be found. Another twist in the case reveals another connection between Mary and Diane. Apparently, Diane had told her closest friend, Gail, in Guntersville, that she'd been working undercover with the authorities to help solve the disappearance of Mary. Others recall that Diane had been oddly secretive a few months before her homicide, and would sometimes vanish for hours without explanation. Detectives who are still alive and were involved in the case do not know anything about Diane's alleged involvement in the case of Mary's disappearance. The motive for the homicide also remains unknown, since Diane's ring was left on her finger and her pocketbook was left next to her body. The time of her passing had also not been determined. Initially, it was believed that she had lost her life around 1 a.m. that morning, but it's now believed that she could have lost her life closer to 8 p.m. Images of the Chevrolet were released in some newspapers, along with images of Diane, who was blonde and was described as being fair-faced. Diane's fiancé was a man named Tommy Antle, who expressed that she'd suffered from depression prior to their meeting. But several weeks before her homicide, she'd written a letter to her aunt, stating that she was so incredibly happy that it felt as though she was being born again. This was due to the wedding plans and proposal. It's asked that should anyone have any additional information regarding Diane's homicide, that they contact the Atlanta Police Department on 140-461-46544. You can also contact the East Point Police Department on 4047-612-177 or the FBI Atlanta office on 770-216-3000. Additionally, an anonymous tip can be sent to Crime Stoppers on 404-577-TIPS. Tracy Ocasio was described as an avid basketball fan. Born August 10, 1981, in Fredericksburg, Virginia, to parents Joe and Elizabeth Ocasio, Tracy had always displayed a strong personality. Tracy was described as the sort of woman who had friends in every room she walked into, even if they had met just mere minutes ago. Tracy made people feel like they had known each other forever. By 27, Tracy was considering her options for the future, a future that would never come. After graduating high school, the Ocasios moved to Ocoee, Florida for a new start. Tracy had no plans to attend college right away, instead taking time out to decide what she wanted to do with her life. She worked as a waitress and in several shops, and by 2009, she was finally coming around to the idea of college. Tracy wanted to study radiology and become a technician in a hospital. Outside of her academic life, Tracy sold handmade jewelry online, a move that was ahead of her time. She was also an avid fan of the Orlando Magic NBA team. Joe Ocasio, Tracy's father, described her as the sort of fan that you'd want to sit 2 seats away from. She was that loud. Tracy's loudness was fueled by passion and love for the game and the team, and that certainly shone through. If, for some reason, Tracy was unable to get tickets for a game, she relied on her usual spot, the Florida Tap Room. Tracy was somewhat of a regular at the tap room, not because she was a big drinker or a partier, but because of the NBA games they showed at the bar. After grabbing herself a drink, Tracy would flit from table to table, talking to other Orlando Magic fans about the game and giving her predictions for the final score. She was also friendly with the bartenders, as they also talked about sports. May 26, 2009 was unfortunately another game day that Tracy had failed to get tickets for. Her dismay was short-lived, as she knew she could count on the Florida Tap Room to be showing the game on the big screen. That evening, she left her parents' home and headed to the bar. Tracy met up with a few friends and they watched the game together. Elizabeth, Tracy's mother, was expecting her home later that evening. Before she left, Tracy told Liz that she wasn't planning on staying out. So when May 27th came and Tracy's bed was empty, Liz began to panic. At first, she thought Tracy must have slept at a friend's house after drinking at the bar. At around 6:30 a.m., Liz sent her daughter a quick text but received no response. An hour later, Liz began calling Tracy's friends to ask if they knew where she was. None of them had seen her since the night before. Tracy's phone was now going to voicemail, and her family was extremely worried. Liz and Joe spent the rest of the day phoning county jails and hospitals, desperately looking for any sign of their daughter. Then, at around 7 p.m., the phone rang. It was the Ocoee Police Department, and they were asking for Tracy. Liz hurriedly explained that she hadn't seen or heard from her daughter since the night before, and the news she was about to receive would only compound that panic. After listening to Liz, the officer explained he was calling because Tracy's yellow Chevrolet Cobalt was found abandoned in a front yard on Franklin Street, 15 miles from the tap room. He divulged to Liz that the car was unlocked, but there was no sign of the keys or Tracy's phone or wallet. The Ocasios raced to Franklin Street and found Tracy's car in a bizarre condition. The Chevy Cobalt was a 3-door car, meaning the front seats had to be pushed forward to allow passengers into the back seat. When Liz arrived, she found that both of the front seats had been pushed all the way forward, allowing direct access to and from the back seats. There was no obvious damage to the car, and it didn't appear Tracy had been involved in an accident. After finding her daughter's car, Liz called the Ocoee Police Department back and asked to report her daughter missing. Officers responded to the call and headed to the tap room, where they would uncover a vital clue. After scouring CCTV records from the night before, officers saw Tracy leaving the bar at around 1:30 a.m., but she wasn't alone. Officers froze. They recognized the man in the tape as 28-year-old James Virgil Hadaway. They made a beeline for his home, hoping he would hold the key to Tracy's whereabouts. When they arrived, James Hadaway immediately went on a campaign to maintain his innocence. He confirmed that he had met Tracy at the bar the night before, and she agreed to go back to his home for a smoke. According to James, 30 minutes later, at around 2 a.m., Tracy left after changing her mind. Bizarrely, Tracy's car was found just yards away from where James lived, but he knew nothing of the incident. When investigators pulled Tracy's phone records, they discovered a flaw in James's defense. Tracy's phone had pinged off of a cell tower close to his home between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m., several hours after he claimed she left. Despite the circumstantial evidence mounting against him, the Ocoee Police Department had no physical evidence to connect James to Tracy's disappearance. Shortly after James was named a person of interest and the news channels began circulating his photo, the Ocoee Police Department received a call from an anonymous victim that we'll call Christy. Christy claimed that in August of 2008, she'd been attacked by James in his car after he had lured her in under the same pretense as Tracy. When she went to hug James goodbye, James maintained his hold and his grip tightened. He then grabbed her by the throat, threatening her. Luckily, Christy was able to escape the car, but her terror didn't end there. As she ran down the street, James began following her. Within seconds, he was right behind her, and she described being picked up by her hair and slammed to the ground. Just as James was about to launch another sick attack to break her neck, neighbors came flooding out onto the street and saved her. She'd kept quiet about her attack due to fear of retribution from James. It turns out Christy wasn't the only woman James had attacked either. A few other anonymous victims came forward with similar stories. Thankfully for Christy, some semblance of justice was served in 2011. James Hadaway was found guilty on several counts, including attempted homicide. He was given a life sentence, and during sentencing, the judge made it clear that Hadaway was only being sentenced for his attack on Christy, though that's not her real name. And this was in no way related to the disappearance of Tracy Ocasio. Several searches of James's property have taken place over the years, but investigators have failed to uncover any physical evidence linking James to Tracy's disappearance. Texas EquuSearch also volunteered their time bringing scent dogs, but this too failed to uncover any new evidence. Anyone with information is asked to contact Detective Michelle Grogan of the Ocoee Police Department at 407-905-3161. Quoting case number 2009-017-537. Tiffany Valiante of Mays Landing, New Jersey was your typical 18-year-old. Tiffany had just graduated from Oak Crest High School and was excited to dive into college. Tiffany had maintained good grades throughout her academic career and had always expressed a keen interest in sports. Tiffany especially excelled in volleyball and softball, preferring the former over the latter. Despite maintaining a shining outwardly appearance, things behind the scenes were quite different. Just months before Tiffany was due to go to college, she would be involved in an incident her parents do not believe was a simple accident. Tiffany Valiante had excelled so far in volleyball that she had obtained a scholarship to Mercy College, New York that year. Being 6'2" gave Tiffany a clear advantage on the court, and this scholarship was considered her golden ticket. When not playing volleyball for the Mercy College team, Tiffany planned to attend classes to major in criminal justice. Tiffany was never afraid to stand up for what was right and what was just. The Valiantes were regarded as a happy, loving family, but things aren't always as they seem. Reports online indicate that in 2014, a year before the incident, Tiffany and her mother Diane had been the focal point of Child Protective Services. This visit came after several spats at the Valiante home, and on one occasion, Diane admitted to punching her daughter in the arm. Shortly before graduation, Tiffany's behavior began to change after the passing of her grandfather. She began skipping lessons and hung out with kids in the bike shed to smoke. Part of her behavioral change may have been due to the inner battles that she was fighting at the time. In 2015, Tiffany came out as a lesbian, which everyone around her seemed to accept. July 12, 2015 would be the night that changed everything for the Valiantes. That evening, Tiffany and her family attended a graduation party. At around 9:15 p.m., Tiffany left the party and her parents stayed behind. Shortly after, Diane, Tiffany's mother, received a call from one of Tiffany's friends who was rather angry. She explained that she believed Tiffany had stolen her debit card and had been using it to make purchases. This, of course, disgusted and enraged Diane, who immediately marched over to Tiffany to discuss the matter. For 10 minutes, the mother and daughter went back and forth over the accusations, with Tiffany vehemently defending herself. According to some reports, toward the end of the argument, Tiffany eventually admitted to having used the card. As Tiffany stood by her car, Diane watched as Tiffany slipped the stolen card in question into her pocket. For her, this was the last straw. She walked inside to grab her husband, and by the time she returned, Tiffany was gone. Diane would later state that standing at 6'2", her daughter easily towered over her peers in parked cars, making it impossible for her to walk away without being spotted. Her parents spent the next hour or so looking for their daughter, angry that she had walked away from the confrontation. Little did they know what was about to unfold. Shortly after 11 p.m., a New Jersey Transit train traveling along the Atlantic City rail line hit something or someone. The driver halted the train and jumped out of their cabin, but it was too late. A young woman with striking blonde hair lay on the tracks. The New Jersey Transit police were called to the scene. At 11:30 p.m., mere minutes after their daughter had been hit by a train, the Valientes reported her missing. Investigators quickly connected the two incidents, and the body found on the tracks was identified as 18-year-old Tiffany. Bizarrely, she was barefoot, and her shorts and hairband had been removed, leaving her in just a white t-shirt. The rail where Tiffany was discovered was 4 miles from where she was last seen, and bizarrely, the New Jersey Transit Police hypothesized she had walked there alone, probably barefoot. The New Jersey Transit Police were in a rush to rule that Tiffany had taken her own life, despite therapists who had spoken to Tiffany in 2014 finding no signs of depression or mental health issues. Authorities also seemed keen to get rid of Tiffany's remains, which were cremated shortly after. Diane vehemently regrets her decision, saying she placed her trust in investigators and she believed they were there to do their job, investigate. The driver of the train and the engineer on board were quick to change their stories too. At first, they claimed they hadn't seen Tiffany until it was too late. But days later, they claimed they spotted her poised by the tracks, waiting for them. They also described the presence of an axe at the scene, which was covered in red marks. Unbelievably, the New Jersey Transit Police claimed to have lost this axe, a vital piece of evidence. Another fact that bothered Tiffany's family and their supporters was her feet. If she had walked barefoot through the bushes and brambles, as investigators had proposed, why were her feet free from scratches and scrapes, and why were they pristine clean? Surely she would have accumulated a small amount of dirt on her feet after having walked 4 miles along a desolate train track. Weeks after Tiffany's passing, while searching the area herself, Diane discovered her daughter's shoes, t-shirt, and headband neatly tucked away under a tree. A sweatshirt and keychain were also present, although Diane did not recognize them as belonging to her daughter. Unsurprisingly, the New Jersey Transit Police also lost the keychain before it could ever be forensically analyzed. The New Jersey Transit Police has come under major fire in this case, as many have accused them of tampering with evidence and trying to conceal the truth. In the wake of the incident, rumors began spreading around the community. The prevailing rumor was that Tiffany was held at weapon point, forced to remove her clothes, shoes, etc., and marched to the train track. Many believe this is connected to the stolen debit card incident that had unfolded hours earlier. From here, Tiffany was either pushed or chased onto the tracks, with the oncoming train traveling at 80 miles per hour. Whoever had orchestrated this hypothetical attack had likely been planning it for some time, as they would have needed to know the train's timetables. Despite calls from Tiffany's family and the community, the New Jersey Transit Police remained steadfast in their decision that Tiffany took her own life. New investigators from the local police department have been assigned to the case and are pushing for it to be reopened. In 2022, a Change.org petition was launched urging New Jersey Attorney General Matthew J. Platkin to reopen the case. The petition currently stands at 13,201 signatures. If you'd like to sign this petition, the link will be listed below. Anyone with information is asked to contact the New Jersey Transit Police at 973-378-6565. Cecilia Huerta Gallegos will forever be remembered for her kind heart and compassion. As a child, Cecilia was the type of girl who would help every animal, big and small, even those creatures that others looked at with disgust. Her compassionate side never left her, and even when her life became busy with children and a career, she always had time for her family and friends. In 2019, Cecilia's life took a bizarre turn when she disappeared from her bedroom. CCTV footage shows Cecilia entering the home but never leaving. So what happened? After graduating high school, Cecilia trained as a nursing assistant. She came from a large family, being one of 7 children. The family were extremely proud of their Dominican heritage, something they continued to express when living in Houston, Texas. As a nursing assistant, Cecilia thrived. She operated as a model of kindness and compassion, and each of her patients felt cared for and listened to. Her managers often highlighted her as an exemplary employee, but she was also known for her feisty side and wasn't afraid to stick up for herself and her patients. According to reports, Cecilia gave birth to 2 children young, though her age is not specified. Her children were her world, and they spurred her to be a better person. Up until 2012, Cecilia lived in Houston, where she had grown up with the father of her children, George Spezia. The nature of the relationship is unknown, and in late 2012, Spezia was sentenced to 7 years in prison. This acted as somewhat of a wake-up call for Cecilia. She didn't want her children's lives to be filled with bad influences, so she moved herself and her 2 children 200 miles east to San Antonio, Texas. Moving to San Antonio meant Cecilia had to leave her beloved job behind, but she believed the move was best for the 3 of them. She quickly found employment elsewhere, where she met Reyes Huerta Gallegos. The 2 immediately hit it off, and by early 2013, the pair were wed. In quick succession, Cecilia and Reyes welcomed 2 children into the world, adding to Cecilia's brood of 2 from her previous relationship. After being a stay-at-home mother for a few years, she went back to work doing what she loved most, nursing. This time finding employment in a nursing home. Her colleagues at the nursing home immediately noticed her husband's bizarre behavior. Cecilia would often work long, late shifts, but her husband had her under a strict curfew. She had an allotted time to commute home once her shift was finished. Otherwise, he would become verbally abusive. Around this time, Cecilia's family also began to worry that Reyes was becoming physically abusive too. He kept them away from her as much as possible and completely isolated her, only allowing her to attend work or classes for nursing. July 7, 2019 was yet another evening of Reyes intimidating his wife at work, which had apparently become a regular occurrence. He would drive by several times a night to check up on her, and had even gotten into a physical altercation with a male member of staff. That evening, Cecilia was due to work until 11 p.m., but for some reason this didn't sit right with Reyes. CCTV footage shows Reyes entering the nursing home sometime before 7 p.m. and making a beeline for his wife. Minutes later, at 7:20 p.m., Cecilia approached her manager, asking if she could leave early as she feared her children were potentially in danger. Sensing the fear in Cecilia's voice, her manager allowed her to finish early. By 7:39 p.m., Cecilia's car was pulling up into the driveway of her San Antonio home, a fact that was verified by CCTV footage. This is one of the last known movements of Cecilia Huerta Gallegos. The following morning, at around 9 a.m., the San Antonio Police Department received a bizarre call from Reyes, stating that there was a cutting in progress. When officers arrived, they found a somewhat disheveled Reyes, who claimed his wife, Cecilia, had attacked him. When asked about his wife's whereabouts, Reyes claimed that after she had attacked him, she left in a car. With no evidence of an active crime, investigators were forced to leave, only to return days later when Cecilia's family reported her missing. Reyes continued his story that Cecilia had walked out on the children and had gotten into a car with a male driver. Cecilia's family immediately refuted this, saying she would never leave her children. In a report from July 8th of 2019, investigators noted that Reyes had a large gash on his face and what appeared to be scratch marks on his chest. Now, knowing that Cecilia was missing, this spurred the police to dig deeper into Reyes. Investigators were able to pull CCTV footage from the home and found that at 7:53 p.m., Cecilia walked into the bedroom but never made it out. Sometime in the early morning hours, the CCTV cameras were turned off for a few hours before being powered up again. Reyes was seen leaving the home for the last time at 6:27 a.m. When he returned at 8:48 a.m., he was captured on CCTV unloading a chainsaw, a shovel, trash bags, and cleaning products. After this, he took a shower before making the 911 call to report a cutting. At no point during the call or the visit does Reyes mention that his wife Cecilia is missing. Disturbingly, just days before she disappeared, she told her family, "If anything happens to me, make sure you look for me." She also told her family that she'd been saving money aside for her children should anything happen to her. Her children, who were all in the home that night, reported hearing Cecilia and Reyes argue, followed by loud screams and shouts. CCTV footage shows that Reyes forced all 4 children to stay in their bedrooms for the remainder of the night. In August of 2021, Reyes Huerta Gallegos was arrested in connection with Cecilia's disappearance. As the case is currently ongoing, the San Antonio Police Department does not want to release key evidence and possibly ruin the integrity of the case. According to Reyes, he's innocent, and he maintains that Cecilia left of her own accord with an unknown man. Cecilia Huerta Gallegos is described as a Hispanic female with black hair, brown eyes, 5'1" and 120 pounds. Anyone with information is asked to contact Crystal Alfredo of the San Antonio Police Department at 210-207-7760. 24-year-old Matrice Richardson was described as a bright and voracious young woman. Matrice was openly lesbian and a proud member of the LGBTQ community. She would often attend events across California and always showed up to support the community. When not working within the community, Matrice could be found studying or working at her internship. While she had a hectic schedule, Matrice managed it with ease and still had some time to socialize. In 2009, the lives of the Richardsons would take a dark turn in one of the most bizarre true crime cases ever. In 2009, Matrice was balancing an internship with a forensic psychologist, along with 2 jobs, one in a store and another at an LGBTQ club. In 2008, Matrice obtained her undergraduate degree in psychology and wanted nothing more than to further her studies. She managed to find an internship with a forensic psychologist and was extremely excited about her career path. Psychology deeply interested Matrice, and in a cruel stroke of irony, it would be a large proponent in her case. On September 16, 2009, Matrice patronized Jeffrey's restaurant located in Malibu, California. According to a receipt obtained by investigators, Matrice was served at 7:40 p.m., ordering an Ocean Breeze cocktail and Kobe steak, along with a $5 valet service charge. Shortly after 8:20 p.m., the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department received a call from Jeffrey's restaurant. They explained that a customer was unable to settle their bill, but that was not the reason for their call. Throughout the time that she had dined there, the customer, who was identified as Matrice Richardson, was displaying bizarre and worrying behavior. The staff identified that they were concerned not only for her safety, but for the safety of staff and other customers. In California, the police or any officer of the peace is allowed to involuntarily hold a person in a psychiatric facility for evaluation for up to 72 hours. This is known as a 5150 and is often used by police to detain those who need help. When officers arrived at the restaurant, Matrice was still acting bizarrely, but her psychiatric condition appeared to have been massively overlooked. Investigators instead decided to administer an on-the-spot breathalyzer test, which Matrice passed, as she'd only drunk 1 cocktail. But when officers searched her car, they found an ounce of an illegal substance, giving them further cause to arrest her. Matrice was marched out of Jeffrey's and taken to the Malibu Lost Hills police station. Despite the many opportunities that were presented, none of the officers on duty at the time questioned Matrice's mental state nor triggered a 5150. Instead, she was booked and placed in a holding cell, at which time her bizarre behavior escalated, most likely due to stress. Sometime after midnight, Matrice was released, pending an appearance in court to settle her charges. According to the local Malibu, the Los Angeles Police Department claimed that before being released, Matrice was allowed to use the phone to make a call. But it was later discovered that on the night Matrice was discharged, the phone was out of service. The LAPD contacted Matrice's mother, Latrice Sutton, who asked them to hold her until the morning. Despite having no money, no car, no phone, and no way home, the LAPD decided to release Matrice Richardson shortly after 12:30 a.m., a move that would come under intense scrutiny. Officers at the station were aware Matrice had no way home, yet allowed her to be released into the cold night. A sighting was made at around 6:30 a.m. that morning, but Matrice never made it home. Latrice Sutton quickly reported her daughter missing, pointing out the huge failings and inadequacies of the LAPD. Latrice had begged them to hold Matrice until the morning, but officers on duty decided that she was an adult and she was capable of taking care of herself. Latrice pushed for justice, but the LAPD refused to admit their shortcomings. Then, on August 9, 2010, the case would take yet another shocking turn. Hikers in Malibu Canyon came across Matrice's body in a creek bed. According to reports, the remains were mummified, with her skull being found away from the rest of her remains. Bizarrely, her clothes were found scattered around the canyon, along with racist graffiti and paint cans. Despite the obvious, the LAPD declared that foul play was not a factor in Matrice's passing. Residents near Malibu Canyon had heard screams in the days after Matrice disappeared, yet this did nothing to sway the LAPD's verdict. It wasn't just the officers at Malibu Lost Hill Station that would come under fire, though. Sergeant Twee Wright, who was the leader of the Malibu Search and Rescue Division, also came under fire. According to reports, in 2009, shortly after Matrice disappeared, search dogs were used in and around Malibu Canyon. According to the local Malibu, quote, Sergeant Wright intentionally stopped the canines after they picked up Richardson's scent. Initially, the search was scheduled for 2 days, but after the dogs picked up the scent, Wright decided not to have them return the second day, claiming the dogs were too tired. The local Malibu also reports that in late 2009, Sergeant Wright intentionally led a drone operator away from the area of Malibu Canyon where Matrice was discovered. His later excuse for the move was that we'll get to it eventually. Despite several lawsuits having been filed and Matrice's case being taken to some of the highest courts in the land, there has been little movement in her case. The LAPD remained steadfast that Matrice Richardson did not meet with foul play, and it was later decided that there were no grounds to prosecute any of the officers involved in her release on September 17, 2009. Matrice's family will continue to fight for justice until the truth is uncovered. Dr. Rhonda Hampton, the forensic psychologist Matrice worked for, has been a huge supporter of the family's case and often attends searches and vigils to help spread the word. Anyone with information is asked to contact Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477. Jeremiah Foucault was described as an exceptionally gifted and talented person, with a flair for software engineering. By 2015, Jeremiah had settled into his new life in Seattle, Washington, and was excelling in his role as a software engineer at Oracle Corp. As he lived alone, Jeremiah put a large emphasis on his social life while always making time for his family too. He especially loved snowboarding and took every chance he got to hit the slopes. In the summer of 2015, Jeremiah disappeared without a trace, and 8 years later, his family is still no closer to uncovering the truth. Born in Standish, Michigan, Jeremiah likely never pictured himself moving out east, but that's exactly what he did following his graduation. He spent a year at the DigiPen Institute of Technology before deciding academia was not for him. The move to Redmond, Washington hadn't been in vain though, and Jeremiah had made meaningful connections in the short time he had been there. He decided to stay in Washington and eventually landed a role as a software engineer at Oracle Corporation in Seattle, Washington. The best part of Jeremiah's role was that it allowed him to work remotely from the comfort of his village apartment. Despite working from home, Jeremiah would constantly be involved in calls and discussions with his colleagues, and had a fair amount of social interaction with them. The flexibility of his job gave Jeremiah a newfound sense of freedom, and it was a job he was eager to keep. July 21st, 2015 had started like any other for Jeremiah. He'd woken up and put on his comfy clothes before plopping himself in front of his laptop for another day's work. Sometime that afternoon, Jeremiah called his manager to let him know he would be coming into the office the following day, July 22nd, a rare occurrence according to his manager. During the call, Jeremiah mentioned his work laptop was broken, hence his rather impromptu visit. The call ended and everyone in the office was under the impression they would be seeing Jeremiah. July 22nd, 2015 rolled around, and as the clock ticked closer to 9 a.m., Jeremiah's colleagues became increasingly confused. By that afternoon, Jeremiah still hadn't shown up to the office, nor had he logged into any of the work systems. Concerned, his manager called the Seattle Police Department and asked them to check in on him. At this point, Jeremiah was not responding to calls or texts and had not made contact with his family or friends. Later that afternoon, investigators arrived at his apartment only to find it eerily quiet. Despite the concerns over his whereabouts, the Seattle Police Department did not take the matter further, even when Jeremiah failed to answer the door. It wasn't until July 23, 2015 that Jeremiah was reported missing, and a proper investigation was launched. Investigators arrived at his apartment once more and were able to access CCTV footage. CCTV footage showed Jeremiah's car entering the apartment's car park at around 8 p.m. on July 21, 2015. On July 22nd, at around 12 a.m., Jeremiah is spotted entering his apartment again. After this, there's no CCTV footage to confirm his whereabouts or his movements. He's never seen leaving the apartment complex. After Jeremiah's disappearance was made public, an anonymous witness came forward, claiming to have seen Jeremiah on the morning of July 22, 2015. The witness claimed to have seen Jeremiah at King Street bus station at around 7 a.m. Investigators were able to pull CCTV footage, which showed a man matching Jeremiah's description, making their way to the bus station's tunnel. Even more bizarrely, there's no CCTV footage of this man leaving the bus station or train station from any exit. According to staff at the station, a glitch in the system meant that 15 minutes worth of footage was lost. While there was no footage to prove the man's whereabouts, investigators turned to Jeremiah's travel card. To use the transport services in Seattle, residents must use an Orca card, similar to London's Oyster card program. The card is scanned upon entry or using transport, and is similarly scanned once leaving the station. The Seattle Police Department confirmed that Jeremiah's Orca card was not used on July 22, 2015, casting major doubts as to whether the man in King Street Station was Jeremiah. Bizarrely, on the day he disappeared, Jeremiah's phone pinged off a tower in downtown Seattle. No other pings were recorded in the days before or after this ping, and the Seattle Police Department has never released a more specific location of the city. It appears that since his July 2015 disappearance, Jeremiah's phone has either been turned off or run out of power. Another thing that's puzzled investigators is the location of Jeremiah's car. He was seen entering the apartment's car park twice in the evening before he disappeared, but the Seattle Police Department has never released any CCTV footage of him leaving, or have they mentioned where he could have possibly gone. When investigators searched his apartment, everything was neat and tidy, and his car was in its usual parking spot. Many have since questioned why Jeremiah would have opted for public transport if his car was in working order. According to investigators, there was no damage to Jeremiah's car, and he'd used it hours before he disappeared. Again, the Seattle Police Department has never mentioned whether any CCTV footage exists of Jeremiah leaving his apartment that morning. Some have speculated that Jeremiah may have left of his own accord to start a new life. But by all accounts, Jeremiah seemed happy and content with his life, although it's not outside of the realm of possibility that he wanted to start anew. Jeremiah's family has vowed to keep searching until they uncover the truth. Jeremiah Edward Foucault is described as a white male with brown hair, brown eyes, 6'2" to 6'4", and 220 pounds. He has a shaved head and wears glasses. He was last seen wearing a black t-shirt, jeans, and tennis shoes. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Seattle Police Department at 206-625-5011, quoting case number 15254-762. On June 3, 1993, a trucker pulled over in Gilroy, California to relieve himself. As he hopped out of the cab, he noticed what appeared to be a discarded mannequin in the distance. As he grew nearer, his worst fears were confirmed. It was not a mannequin, but the body of a woman. In a state of shock, the trucker ran back to his cab and drove to the nearest business to call the Santa Clara Sheriff's Department to the scene. What the sheriff's office uncovered would shock them and leave a decades-long mystery in its wake. When the Santa Clara deputies arrived at the scene, they too discovered the body of a white woman aged 30 to 45. It was discovered that her body had been placed close to a pile of rocks and that a flashlight was close to her body. Investigators were unsure of the significance of those two things, but they would become incredibly important years down the line. The woman's body was transported to the Santa Clara County Medical Examiner's office, where the autopsy was performed. In their report, the medical examiner noted that the woman was white, aged 30 to 45, and had brown hair and brown eyes. They also saw the presence of a 5-inch scar on her abdomen, which was likely the result of surgery to remove her gallbladder. The report also detailed how the woman's teeth were in a serious level of deterioration, and that it was evident she'd received treatment before, but had not cared for them in a long time. Most tragically of all, it was noted that track marks were present, consistent with substance use. This, coupled with the clothing she was found wearing, a blue jacket, blue t-shirt, blue jeans, and a white bra with white Nike socks and brown shoes, indicated to the medical examiner that the woman was likely homeless or transient. This presented the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Department with a unique set of challenges. Working on the assumption that the woman was homeless made it much less likely that she had been reported missing, or even been noticed as missing from her community. Nevertheless, the Santa Clara Sheriff's Department began sifting through missing person reports, hoping that they would be able to make a match. When weeks had passed without any leads, the Sheriff's Department took to calling the woman Blue Pacheco Doe, after the place and clothing that she was found wearing. Sketches of the doe were circulated around Santa Clara County and the rest of California, but nobody ever came forward to claim her. She was eventually laid to rest with a headstone that bore no birth date or name. Then, in 2006, 13 years after she was discovered, the Santa Clara Sheriff's Department received a bizarre letter from an already incarcerated serial killer, Keith Hunter Jesperson. In his letter, Keith claimed that the woman was called Clara, Carla, or Cindy, and that the two had met at a truck stop along Interstate 5 in Corning, California. He wrote that he'd offered the woman a ride and a meal, and that the two had driven to Williams, where they had intimate contact with each other. It was during this act that he struck. After she was deceased, he kept her body in the truck until he reached the area where he dumped her. Investigators were hesitant to believe Keith's confession. After all, serial killers are not known to be reliable narrators, and aside from this confession, there was little physical evidence to back the case up. Without a name for Blue Pacheco Doe, the Santa Clara Sheriff's Department decided to keep investigating the case, making sure to keep a mental note of Keith's confession. By 1995, Keith had become known as the Happy Face Killer, after the happy faces that he would use to sign off his letters. He took to writing these letters as a means to gain attention from the press and the police after two people had been falsely accused of committing his crimes. He had first been arrested in March of 1995 in the case of his girlfriend, 41-year-old Julie Winningham in Washington. Shortly after his arrest, he realized that the game was up and decided to tell investigators everything, in the hopes that the judge would later show him leniency. He confessed to taking the lives of at least 8 women in the states of Washington, California, Oregon, Nevada, Florida, Nebraska, and Wyoming between 1990 and 1995. Throughout his years in prison, Keith would confess to having as many as 185 victims, although he would later recant many of these confessions. Investigators and attorney generals from several different states worked tirelessly to have Keith extradited and tried in their state, but investigators in Santa Clara, California, were still troubled by the Blue Pacheco Doe. They revisited Keith Jesperson and found his account to be trustworthy, as he had accurately described that he'd left her body near a pile of rocks and that a flashlight had been left behind at the scene. By 2019, genealogy was making waves in forensic circles, and the investigators at the Santa Clara Sheriff's Department decided to submit Blue Pacheco Doe for testing. Sergeant Shannon Catalano reached out to the DNA Doe Network in 2019 and asked for their assistance in the case. According to a press release by the DNA Doe Network, the project was undertaken by volunteers who began assessing DNA samples in December of 2019 and found that the blue Pacheco doe had recent Norwegian ancestry from the 1700s. Volunteers then continued to sift through GED Match and other genealogy sites, looking for immigration records and any possible living relatives. By 2021, they had found a possible living nephew in Oregon and contacted him to ask him to provide a DNA sample. From there, researchers were able to narrow it down to a few candidates, and with the help of the family, they finally reached a conclusion in early 2022. Finally, in April of 2022, after 29 years of being unidentified, the Santa Clara Sheriff's Department announced that Blue Pacheco Jane Doe had been identified as 45-year-old Patricia Patsy Skipple of Colton, Oregon. According to her family, Patsy left home in the middle of the night in 1993 following an argument with her husband and simply never returned home. Her family had been looking for her ever since, not knowing that she was laying in an unmarked grave. Keith Jesperson was convicted of taking Patsy's life in 2007, long before investigators knew her name. He entered a guilty plea and provided the court with information that only he would have known. While it's taken almost 3 decades for Patsy to get her name back, this case gives hope to other prosecutors in Jesperson's case, as a few of his victims have remained unidentified to this day. 23-year-old Mary Robin Walter, who went by Robin, was known to be a kind and caring young woman in her small community of Great Bend, Kansas. By 1980, she had gotten married to the love of her life, Douglas Walter, and the two had welcomed a child into the world. Robin was also a nursing student at Barton County Community College, which was located close to the Nelson Trailer Park where she lived with her family. Shortly after the new year had rung out, Douglas returned home to the trailer, expecting to see his wife waiting for him, but instead he was greeted with a grisly scene. At around 6:40 p.m. on January 24, 1980, Douglas pulled into the trailer that he shared with Robin and their daughter Pamela. As he approached the front door, he noticed that there was no sound coming from inside the trailer, which made his heart skip a beat. After leaving work that evening, he'd gone to a club with some friends and had no idea what was waiting for him. He entered the trailer and found his wife laying motionless on the ground. As he ran over to her, he discovered that she'd been attacked with a weapon that the two owned and kept in the trailer for self-defense. Douglas tried to save his wife, but it was too late. He ran for the closest phone and called the Barton County Sheriff's Department to the scene. Soon, the small trailer park was packed with police officers, and neighbors gathered outside to see what the commotion was. Robin's body was transported back to the medical examiner's office, where it was discovered that she'd suffered 12 separate wounds to the neck, chest, abdomen, and arm. Forensic investigators confirmed that the weapon used was owned by the Walters, and the investigation began. In his report to the Barton County Sheriff's Department, Douglas helped investigators piece together Robin's last movements. According to the Wichita Eagle, Robin had failed to show up to her 1 p.m. class at the Barton County Community College, and had also failed to pick up her daughter from the babysitter at 3 p.m. Unfortunately, Douglas had not been alerted to either of these, and had no idea anything was amiss until he entered the trailer that evening. Robin and Douglas had moved from Kingman to Great Bend in 1974, and Robin had worked at the Great Bend Manor Hospital alongside her nursing degree. Douglas told investigators that everyone at work adored Robin, and that just last week she had delivered her first baby, something she was excited about. Robin was known to have had an excellent bedside manner, and her educators did not doubt that she would pass her nursing qualifications. Investigators quickly discovered that Robin had not been assaulted, and there were no signs of robbery or forced entry to the trailer, leaving them motiveless. Douglas would later tell investigators that he and Robin regularly left the front door unlocked and sometimes left the house keys in the car, While they were laid back in regards to locking the door, the pair did keep a weapon in the trailer if they ever needed to defend themselves. Robin's passing sent shockwaves through the community, and hundreds of mourners gathered at her funeral. Everyone who knew her, both from her time as a nurse and from her private life, described her as a happy and outgoing young woman who had no enemies. While Robin had no enemies, the Barton County Sheriff's Department had a person of interest from the outset: Stephen Hanks, the Walters' next-door neighbor. Stephen was interviewed several times, along with others that lived at the trailer park. However, in 1980, there was not enough evidence to move forward with the prosecution. Without a confession or solid evidence, Stephen remained a person of interest, and the case quickly went cold. In the months after Robin's passing, Douglas tried to move on for the sake of their daughter, but found things difficult. He told the Wichita Eagle that his wife's passing haunted him every day, and he vowed to find the person responsible. The Great Bend Tribune, a local newspaper, offered up to a $1,000 reward for information that led to an arrest. But as 1980 faded into 1981, the case grew colder. Over the years, the Barton County Sheriff's Office continued to flick through Robin's case file, but nothing new ever came to light. That was until April of 2022, when the cold case was officially reopened. When the case was re-examined this time, it was found that some information had been overlooked. Sheriff Brian Bellendier, along with the Barton County Sheriff's Department, pored over these revelations and discovered that they now had enough evidence to charge Stephen L. Hanks with the crime. In December of 2022, after 42 years, 68-year-old Stephen L. Hanks was officially charged with taking the life of 23-year-old Robin Walters. Stephen had already served time in 1983 for another serious crime that took place in Great Bend. Attorney Levi Morris told KIRO 7, "Whether it's old evidence or new evidence, we'll just save that for court. We aren't going to make any comments on what it is at this time." Stephen L. Hanks is currently being held on a $500,000 bond, and his trial is set to take place in 2023. Joy and Charlie Hibbs had been married for several years when they decided to move their family, consisting of 2 children, Angie and David, to Croydon, Pennsylvania. Charlie's work had seen the family move from Florida all around the country before finally settling in Croydon. By 1991, the family were comfortable in their new home and life for the Hibbs was doing great. Then in April of 1991, a fire would ravage through the home, taking the life of Joy. At first, investigators believed that Joy had passed away in the fire. However, the results of her autopsy would shock them. When David returned home from school at around 1 p.m. on April 19th, he immediately noticed the smoke pouring out of the windows. At first, he thought that his mother Joy had simply burnt some food. However, as he moved further into the house, he noticed that a large fire was raging within. In his report to the police, David told them that gas burners had been left on in the kitchen and that the ceiling tiles had been falling off. Panicked, David ran to the closest neighbor and told them to call 911. The fire department arrived quickly at the scene and started to tackle the blaze, at which point David realized that his mother was still inside the home as her car was out front. His attempts to save his mother's life were stopped, and he was bundled into the back of an ambulance for a checkup. Fire crews made their way through the home, stopping at David's room. Inside, they discovered the body of 35-year-old Joy and worked for hours to tackle the blaze as well as rescue her. Unfortunately, by the time the fire brigade arrived at the scene, it was too late, and Joy was pronounced deceased. Charlie and the rest of the Hibb family were informed of the news, and the Bristol Township Police were summoned to the scene. Initially, it was believed that Joy had passed away as a result of the fire. However, her autopsy would shake the Bristol Township Police. The medical examiner noted that Joy had been attacked before the fire had intentionally been set to make it look like an accident. A forensic fire investigator had conducted a search of the scene in the days after April 19th and discovered that the fire had been intentionally set in David's room, where Joy's body was found. A clock in David's bedroom had stopped at 12:54 p.m., giving investigators a narrow time frame to work with. Investigators also discovered that Joy had gone about her normal routine, picking up some groceries before arriving home mid-morning. She had also been visited by 2 people from a local church who had left by 11:45 a.m., giving investigators an hour's window. When interviewed, neighbors told the Bristol police that they'd spotted a suspicious blue Monte Carlo car parked outside of the house on the morning of the fire. Charlie and David would later confirm that their former neighbor, Robert Atkins, drove a similar car, and that Joy had been in the said car several times before the fire. Then, days after the fire had ravaged the Hidds' home, David divulged a vital clue to the police. In the weeks before the crime, David had overheard a phone call between his mother and Robert Atkins in which the two were arguing. Robert was known to supply Joy and Charlie with substances, and on this occasion, Joy had called him as she was unhappy with the quality. She also demanded her money back. However, this made Robert incredibly angry. He began to threaten Joy and even called the doctor's office where she worked to threaten her there too. At first, Joy wasn't sure whether Robert would really follow through with his threats. However, when she discovered that her tires had been slashed, she began to worry. After her tires had been slashed, someone had also kicked in the back door of their home, and Joy was too frightened to tell her husband, Charlie, what was happening for fear that he might harm Robert. When investigators heard that Robert had threatened Joy in the weeks before the fire, they visited him. Robert provided the police with an alibi that was backed up by his wife, and without much evidence to work with, the Bristol Township Police were forced to look elsewhere. With little information, the case eventually went cold. That was until 2016, when April Atkins, the now ex-wife of Robert Atkins, made a startling confession. She told the Bristol Township Police that on April 19, 1991, Robert had returned home and confessed to taking Joy's life. That evening, he forced her to call her job and let them know that she wouldn't be in for the weekend, before driving the family to the Pocono Mountains in order to establish an alibi. She also told investigators that when she awoke the next morning in the hotel room, she saw her husband in new shoes, carrying a bag of items which he later disposed of in the woods. For years, April was too terrified of Robert to come forward to the police, and even after their separation in 2006, he had threatened her into silence. In 2014, the case was reopened and both parties were re-interviewed, in which Robert coached April on what to say. Finally, in 2016, the guilt had gotten to April, and she decided to come forward and do the right thing. The Bristol Township Police began collecting evidence before finally putting the case before a grand jury in January of 2022. By May of 2022, the grand jury had indicted 56-year-old Robert Atkins, and he was finally arrested and charged with the crime. In mid-2022, he was brought before a judge who did not grant bail, and Robert Atkins is currently awaiting trial at the Bucks County Correctional Center. July 23, 1980, was a perfect sunny day in Arlington, Washington. So perfect, in fact, that Spencer Fuentes decided to head down to the Stillaguamish River to do some fly fishing. As he made his way through the woods and down to the river, he noticed a thick stench fill the air that only got worse as he approached the riverbed. Before grabbing his line, Spencer looked down into the shallow waters below and noticed something caught in a log jam. At first, he wasn't sure what it was, but as he knelt closer, he discovered the unmistakable form of a human body. Horrified at what he found, he threw down his line and ran to the nearest house to call for help. Shortly after, the Snohomish County Sheriff's Department arrived at the scene and immediately opened their investigation. It was determined that the body was that of a male, aged 30 to 70, and that he'd been found wearing a dark suit jacket, cotton pants, Winthrop dress shoes, and a belt buckle with the letters GRN. Bizarrely, the coroner was unable to determine exactly why he had ended up in the river, and there were no immediate signs of violence. In their report, the coroner noted that the man may have suffered from coronary artery disease, which causes the arteries around the heart to narrow and become hard. It was also noted that the man suffered from a condition called hammer toe, which would have caused pain when walking. The man's Winthrop dress shoes were lined with paper, leather, and metal, and had insoles to likely correct this condition. At first, investigators believed that the body may have belonged to a fisherman, but no such missing person reports had been filed in the area. Investigators turned to Dr. Keith Leonard, a local dentist, and asked him to create a dental chart of the man, in the hopes that someone would recognize his unique dentals. According to the reports, the man's teeth were in poor shape, and it was evident that he'd not received dental treatment for quite a few years. Despite the efforts that were made by Dr. Keith Leonard, Coroner Dr. Clayton Haberman, and the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office, the case grew cold. By August of 1980, the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office had failed to make any headway in the case and decided to have the man buried at Arlington Cemetery. Those who worked on the case and those in Arlington took to calling the man Stilly Joe in absence of his real name. Multiple appeals were issued to the public. However, nobody ever came forward to claim Stilly Joe. In 2018, the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office decided to reopen the case and hoped that scientific advancements would finally bring him his name back. Dr. Kathy Taylor, the Washington State anthropologist, conducted the post-exhumation examination and discovered more invaluable clues. In 1980, it had been thought that the man was of Indian or Native American descent, more specifically of Coast Salish heritage, due to the proximity to the Tulalip Reservation. Several appeals had made their way to the Tulalip Reservation. However, nobody recognized him, and Dr. Taylor discovered why. In her report, she noted that Stilly Doe was likely Caucasian, Hispanic, or Native American, and that he was around 5'5" to 5'9", and 45 to 59 years old. While she couldn't shed any light on how he ended up in the river, Dr. Taylor did discover several well-healed fractures to his ribs and spine. A new composite sketch was created and circulated in the Daily Herald. However, this too failed to produce any new leads. In early 2019, the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office partnered with the University of North Texas and sent them Stilly Doe's femur bones in order to facilitate DNA extraction. This DNA profile was uploaded to CODIS, but again, no matches were found. Then in 2021, the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office and the Medical Examiner's Office reached out to Othram Inc. based in Texas. A DNA sample was sent to Othram for further analysis after uploading the profile to GED Match. Genealogists then discovered 12,000 distant relatives. They also discovered that Stilly Doe was Caucasian. Genealogists began sifting through thousands of records and discovered Stilly Doe's possible great-great-great-grandparents. From here, they were able to track down distant living relatives in Washington, who confirmed that one of their family members had disappeared from Arlington in 1980. In 2022, Othram reached out to relatives in order to obtain a confirmatory DNA sample. Months later, they held a press conference announcing that they had formally identified Stilly Doe as 82-year-old Othaniel Philip Ames of Arlington, Washington. Othaniel's granddaughter had been the one to provide the DNA sample that cracked the case. Born in 1898, Othaniel had moved to Washington from Elwood, Iowa in the 1950s with his family. By the 1960s, he'd separated from his wife and found work on a dairy farm and in a paper mill. By 1980, he was living in a cabin in the woods of Arlington and had become ill. Sometime in 1980, he gave his children, grandchildren, and extended family his personal items before telling them that he was going on a trip. He gave away the deeds to his home to his next-door neighbor and simply never returned. It does not appear that a missing person report was ever filed, although Othaniel's family often wondered what had become of him from time to time. Othaniel's daughter-in-law, Margaret Ames, told the Columbian, "There'd been many times when I thought about Odie and what happened to him, so this has brought closure to me." On August 25, 1995, residents making their way down Peacock Hill Road in Kitsap County, Washington, saw something bizarre at the side of the road. To those quickly passing by, it appeared that somebody had dumped a sleeping bag, but for those who got closer, the truth became apparent. Sometime that afternoon, the Kitsap County Sheriff's Office was called to the scene when one curious passerby finally decided to investigate further. What they found in the ditch wasn't just a discarded sleeping bag, but the human remains of an adult woman. According to reports, the woman had been found close to the 15,000 block of Peacock Hill Road, stuffed inside the sleeping bag with pink curlers that were also found at the scene. The Kitsap County Sheriff's Office immediately opened an investigation, and it didn't take them long to discover that the victim was 61-year-old Patricia Lorraine Barnes. Patricia was known to have lived a transient lifestyle, hopping from one homeless shelter to the next in the Pioneer Square area. The coroner confirmed in their report that Patricia had met with foul play, and now the hunt was on to find the person responsible. Having no fixed address, investigators found it difficult to trace Patricia's last known movements, and those in her life confirmed that they had seen her just a few days before her life was taken. According to investigators, over 130 pieces of evidence were collected from the scene, including Patricia's body, and investigators hoped that at least one of them would lead them to the person responsible. Alongside forensic evidence, investigators were also able to gather witness statements and created a composite sketch of a person who is believed to have been the last one to see Patricia alive. Despite all of these leads, investigators quickly found themselves with a cold case, and as the tips stopped trickling in, the case grew cold. Over the years, investigators continued to look at Patricia's case, hoping new evidence or leads would come to light, but the case remained as cold as it had been in 1995. Friends and family of Patricia also never gave up hope, offering rewards and posting flyers appealing to anyone with information to come forward. It wasn't until 2018 that the Kitsap County Sheriff's Office decided to reopen the investigation after learning about the success of genealogy in the case of the Golden State Killer. During the initial investigation, it was believed that Patricia had fallen victim to the Spokane serial killer Robert Lee Yates, but later DNA tests would disprove this theory. In a bid to reignite the case, the Kitsap County Sheriff's Office sent evidence to the Washington Crime Lab and Othram, a private lab based in Texas. From here, Othram used forensic-grade genome sequencing to develop possible suspects in Patricia's case. In March of 2022, the Kitsap County Sheriff's Office, along with Othram, held a press conference in which they announced that they'd finally identified the person who took Patricia's life as Douglas Keith Crone. Unfortunately, justice will never be served, as Douglas passed away in Arizona in 2016. Othram revealed that a cigarette end left behind by Douglas had provided them with the DNA they needed to close this case once and for all. At this time, the Kitsap County Sheriff's Office is still investigating the link between the two, with Detective Grant telling the media, quote, "How they were connected or how they came to meet, nobody knows. Douglas isn't mentioned in any other reports as an acquaintance or a witness or a person of interest. I went through all the other tips and logs and no one mentioned his name. It was a completely random encounter, I would suspect." Douglas is known to have had a lengthy criminal history in Washington state, and investigators are currently looking into whether he may be responsible for similar crimes in the area. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.